In my commentary and critique video of Detroit Become Human, I mentioned this was the first title I had played from the studio Quantic Dream. I mentioned I also purchased 2 other titles from them, Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. I finally found the time to sit down with Beyond Two Souls, and it's safe to say I was beyond impressed with this title. Now there will be spoilers for the narrative, so I highly suggest you experience the game yourself and then return to this video. I'm going to go through the chapters very carefully and analyse them to the best of my ability. Now despite the title of this video, there were some flaws with this game, and I will be pointing them out as we go along. As usual, being the sort of game that this is, there is a lot to unpack. Timestamps will be in the description below. This is going to be a long one. And with all that being said, let's begin. Beyond Two Souls is the 4th title to be released by Quantic Dream. Like I aforementioned, I missed the title on release, as I was preoccupied by the small release of Rockstar Games' new title at the time. I recently picked up the game after finishing David Cage's recent project, 2018's Detroit Become Human. After finishing Detroit Become Human, I didn't think a narrative-driven title would match that experience until I played Beyond Two Souls. Beyond Two Souls is a narrative-driven adventure game, but like most of Quantic Dream's titles, it is more of an interactive film, which in turn leads to a much more personal and emotional experience. It also allows individuals who are not frequent gamers to experience narratives such as this. This has been David Cage's goal since Quantic Dream's inception, although I do feel the control scheme in this title is more complex than Detroit Become Human, but more on that later. David Cage, who is the writer and director, has gone on record and stated that Beyond Two Souls should only be played the once, and I do agree and disagree with his statement. However, for the sake of this video, I have played through the game twice on PlayStation 5 and PC. When you load the game for the first time, you are given the option to play the game as originally designed, or to follow in chronological order. And I tell you now, you are going to want to play in chronological order if you don't want to think too much. My first playthrough was how the game was intended to be played, and it did jump around quite a lot, but if you are paying attention to the narrative and the lore, it isn't difficult to work out as to what is going on to a certain extent, but it does a great job of not becoming too predictable, apart from one chapter, but I'll talk about that later. The footage you are seeing is from my second playthrough on PC in sequence. If you want to enjoy the story without having to think too hard, I would suggest playing the game in sequence, rather than how Cage intended. But like I say, you will still have a great experience when the chapters are mixed, as it is all masterfully tied together at the end. And being a David Cage game, the premise at the start is always hard to comprehend. Best way to describe this game is like Control meets Death Stranding, even though Beyond Two Souls was released years before those titles were even in development. Well, probably. We embark on an emotional journey through the life of Jodie Holmes, a girl born with a rare gift, or some might say, a curse. The character is portrayed by Elliot Page. She has been tied to an entity, an imaginary friend, a guardian, as such, in which she is named Aiden, or as we pronounce in England, Aiden. Throughout Jodie's early life, she is subjected to Aiden's tantrums, in which lands her in trouble with her guardians. We take control of both characters, Jodie and Aiden, if we can even class him as a character. I digress on that for the moment. We switch between the two on the fly when needed. Jodie can sometimes keep Aiden under control, but he is mostly controlled by us, the player. Because of Jodie's condition, she has a connection to what is called the Infraworld, in which I believe is a link between heaven, or most probably like hell. While she tries to sleep, other entities try to attack her, with Aiden trying to come to her defence. Or perhaps it is Aiden who has the connection, come to think about it, but we'll look into this later. The encounters are too much for her foster parents. One encounter resulted in Aiden nearly strangling a child in a snowball fight. Talk about taking it too far. They take her to the United States Department of Paranormal Activity in order to seek some help. They arrange an appointment with Nathan Dawkins, portrayed by Willem Dafoe, resulting in Jodie staying in the permanent custody of Dawkins as well as Cole Freeman, portrayed by Cardeem Hardison, until they find some answer to her condition. That is a rough introduction to the plot. Of course, we will unpack more of the plot as we go on. Buckle in, as we're about to do that right now. All 26 chapters. The game starts with the prologue. Obviously, Jodie is talking to us the player. I'm assuming this by the way she explains to us that she was born with a gift, the ability to see things that no one else can. All what she has seen, experienced, is all mixed up in her head. She needs to remember, put events in order, by starting at the beginning, even though the prologue doesn't start at the beginning. It starts after a scene about halfway through the narrative, but again, I digress on that for now. The game obviously doesn't want to give everything away right in the first opening minutes. This opening scene sets to show you how powerful Jodie's quote, gift, is. It opens with a county sheriff questioning Jodie, whom found her out on the road. Of course he took her in as he was concerned for her safety. We see quick cuts to clips of people pursuing Jodie through a large wooded area. The sheriff is trying to get some answers out of Jodie, but gets nowhere. It is until the sheriff asks about the scar on her head, we see a glimpse of what Jodie's again, and I quote, gift is all about. She launches his cup of coffee without even touching it. We then jump to Nathan in a car rushing to the scene on the phone, trying to get the pursuers to stand down, in knowing fully well what damage she can inflict. In these early minutes we can assume Jodie could be labelled as dangerous after what she did to that ceramic mug. Jodie can sense her pursuers are close. Turns out it is a SWAT team hunting her down, again presenting to the player that she is dangerous. I gathered straight away that she must have escaped from somewhere, and it is quite clear Nathan is some sort of carer or doctor for her. Now, like most of the games I critique on this channel, I had seen nothing of this game before I played it. Like I aforementioned, I missed it completely on its original release. Now, even though Cage presents this prologue in such a way that it is hard to comprehend and somewhat mysterious, unless you are deeply focused on what is going on, even though, like I aforementioned, not much information is presented to us, but we can clearly work out by Jodie's small use of power, the SWAT team pursuing her, and Nathan en route to try and stop a massacre, it is clear she is a potential danger to the public, a classified government project of sorts. Once Nathan arrives, he was too late. She did indeed massacre the SWAT team, as I predicted. This clarified what I had to be surmising. Now obviously this prologue is nothing spectacular, but the way in which it was presented was genius. Like I say, the game doesn't hold your hand or give you this wave of information right out of the gate in order for us to understand what is going on, but it gives us enough for eagle-eyed players to start laying the foundations to work it all out. Of course, you don't even have to think about it at all if you don't want to. You can simply enjoy the cinematics, because it all gets wrapped up at the end of the narrative anyway, but it's still a great opener in the sense that practically nothing has to be said in order for you to understand what is going on. This is where Jodie's story begins. We join a young Jodie portrayed by Caroline Wolfson in a room that is being monitored by closed-circuit television. She is playing with her dolls until she is approached by a doctor, who we will learn as Cole Freeman. He approaches her, apologises for interrupting, and quotes that it is time. This is where we start to take control. Like most of Quantic Dream's titles, the control scheme is simple but effective enough to make you feel you are still in control and engaged. Similar to Detroit Become Human, for example, most of the interactions are done through the right joystick. For example, when attempting to get Jodie to stand up, we have to move the right joystick in the direction of a white ball that appears on screen. In some instances this works well, However, some scenes later when, per se, there is a ball on your left and you move your joystick to the left, you think it would register, right? Well, no. Some require an upward movement instead. What I'm getting at is that although the controls on paper are simple, in execution they're very clunky, and we're about to find that out in the next scene in this chapter. As we go on, I will mention more of the controls, and you'll see what problems I had along the way. We are escorted out of the room and led down a corridor surrounded by doctors and or scientists. Again, I'm not saying I'm Mr. Wonderful, but my assumption of her being under some sort of care / held in some sort of facility was correct. Once at our designated room, we sit down with Nathan, again confirming he was indeed a doctor or scientist that is caring or analysing for her condition. Jodie sits down and Cole puts some sort of monitoring device on her head. Maybe this is a real world medical device, or it's just fictional. If it's non-fictional, let me know what it's called and what it does. Does it monitor brain activity? Anyway, moving on. Cole does a great job of diverting Jodie's attention that the device is more of a crown rather than a monitoring device, complimenting that it suits her. Now I will say that for Nathan and Cole, they are very good with Jodie and understanding, so it is clear that this is some sort of test as well as a tutorial for more controls. Jodie is sat at a table with 5 cards laid out in front of her. Next door is someone else with the same set of cards. All Jodie has to do is guess which cards they have picked up. In order to do this, we have to use a series of buttons to activate Jodie's mind reading abilities. We use Y or triangle to activate it, and the left bumper or L1 to move to points marked with orange orbs, and we use the right stick to move around. Once seeing through the wall, we can see what card the assistant is holding. Jodie reports what she has seen by obviously picking the right card. We're then asked to work out the next card, in which she does correctly again. Jodie is then tasked with knocking down some building blocks in the next room. Once Jodie looks over into the room, we're shown a mechanic to knock items over by holding LB/L1 and holding back both joysticks and releasing them both simultaneously. Cole then asks Jodie to do the same again, but to something else, in which she does. But suddenly she gets carried away and starts trashing the room, in which sends the assistant into a frenzy, and rightfully so. Cole reaffirms to Jodie that the experiment is over. Jodie continues to wreak havoc as everyone involved pleads with her to stop, until she does, screaming, quote, "No, Aiden." Cole and Nathan burst into the room and reassure her that it's over. Jodie states it will never be over. Now what can we take from this chapter? First and foremost, this chapter is obviously a basic control tutorial, but it is overshadowed by a small amount of plot build-up and character development. Again, we see that Jodie is being studied in some sort of facility and being overseen by Nathan and Cole. We learn that the pair treat her very well and try to keep her in good spirits. No pun intended there, I swear. They try to keep her from losing her childhood innocence too quickly by allowing her to have her own room with her own toys, etc. The biggest reveal to the players is that Jodie's mind read ability to see through walls and knock items over is not an ability but an entity named Aiden. Now this did surprise me. I thought it was generally a powerful mind that Jodie had, but once she was pleading for Aiden to stop, it threw me off and I re-evaluated. That's why I presented her ability in that way, because I think this definitely threw off a lot of players, and not just me. It is also apparent that Jodie has very limited control of Aiden, hence the destruction of the room. Aiden's power also has a stressful effect on her body. Obviously Aiden's control, 9 times out of 10, is done by us the player. We control this entity. The control scheme for the most part is simple enough, but navigating via the orange orbs can be tricky. Sometimes it automatically jumps to one you didn't even want. Still an interesting concept though. It also brings the title of the game to the forefront. 2 souls. We are controlling 2 souls that for the most part work independently from each other. The chapters work well in pulling you into what is happening and showing the sheer power of the entity that Jodie is tied to. This chapter starts a little further back with Jodie in bed, back in her parents' custody. The strange events start to take place around her, such as lights flickering and toys powering on by themselves. This wakes Jodie, and rightfully so calls out for her mum, like I think we all would at that age. The next morning, Jodie's in the living room staring outside at the snowfall. Her mum suggests that she finds something to do, rather than spending all day looking out the window. Jodie starts to explore her house in order to, well, find something to do. We can pick many things to do, but it all leads to the same path anyway. I chose to look into the bathroom mirror, in which causes some creature and or entity to appear behind her, in which makes her jump. Is this what caused the disturbance the previous night? Well, maybe. Jodie decides to go to her room and play with her dolls. When this scene was playing along with the backing soundtrack, I began to feel increasingly sorry for Jodie. I really started to empathise and sympathise for her. No matter what she does, she cannot avoid these events. It is only herself who has to experience them. I get this impression that she feels very isolated. Well, she is. We will see much more of this as the narrative goes on. Jodie really does have a tough time. While playing with the dolls, it is apparent that Jodie is growing tired of Aiden's constant presence once he busts the doll tea party. Was he trying to join in or just winding her up? This causes Jodie to find something else to do. She goes to see her dad, who snubs her as he's working. She runs an errand for her mum by getting some cooking oil out the garage. She is once again hindered by Aiden affecting the lights purposely, trying to scare her. This causes Jodie to want some attention from her mum, in which thankfully she gets. Don't forget about your kids, folks. The smartphone can wait. Jodie goes out in the back garden for a while to enjoy the snow. She sits on the swing while Aiden pushes her. Once bored of that, she overhears children playing in the road opposite. She goes to the fence to investigate. She decides she wants to join in on the fun, knowing fully well she's not allowed out of her garden. Aiden aids her in escaping, and she proceeds to join in on the snowball fight. After launching some snowballs, one of the kids starts to pick on her, rubbing snow in her face. Despite her begging him to stop, he carries on. Helpless, she calls on Aiden for help. Aiden steps in and starts to choke the child. Personally, I think he deserved it. Good job, Aiden. This of course switches roles. It is now the bully who is panicked, calling out what Jodie did, and that she's a witch. Jodie's dad comes out of the house and retrieves her, marching her back into the house. Of course she gets a grilling as she left the back garden. Her dad asks what she did to the boy. Jodie denies that she attacked him, in which she actually didn't, and states it was Aiden defending her. Now I'm guessing her parents are yet to encounter Aiden, as her dad quotes, "He is sick of the stories," and threatens to punish her, until again she is saved by Aiden showing his presence. After her dad bricking it, he sends her to her room instead. Some time passes and we're in the next scene. Her mum says goodnight to her. Before she leaves, Jodie says to her mum that she is afraid of the monsters, but her mum brushes it off and states that she'll be fine, but she does leave a light on for her. Once her mum leaves, Aiden switches on the bedside lamp, in which causes Jodie to lash out at Aiden verbally, stating that it is his fault that her parents don't love her, which is a tragic statement of a child of that age to say. Aiden leaves the room and eavesdrops on Jodie's parents' conversation, in which I will play so we can get full context.
You shouldn't get so angry with her, Philip. She's just a little girl.
Little girl? You've seen what you can do, right? Susan, that's no little girl. Susan, that's a monster.
Don't you dare talk about her like that.
The things that are happening around her, they're not normal, and they're getting stronger. For the love of God, Susan, what's to stop her from turning on us?
Oh, don't be ridiculous.
Susan, that thing is like an uncontrollable animal. We have no idea what it's capable of. We have a demon living with us right under our own roof. Susan, this is going to stop, and it's going to stop now, before we end up crazy or dead. We agreed to look after a little girl, Susan, but not this. Not this.
We get some more information on this scene. It is clear Jodie's father is not as caring of Jodie like her mum is. Clearly he is shocked by the situation, but his choice of words weren't the best. But did you pick up on the most important line of this scene? He quotes,
We agreed to look after a little girl, Susan, but not this. Not this.
These parents of Jodie's are actually foster parents. Back upstairs now, Jodie is trying to sleep, but is disturbed by Iden because for some reason he is scared. Jodie reassures him that nothing is going to happen. Jodie tries to settle down, but again we soon see why Iden was scared. Out of nowhere Jodie is attacked, but we're not exactly sure why. Jodie's foster parents burst into the room to find Jodie all scratched up. She proves her mum wrong, that the monsters do exist. And there ends this chapter. So in dissecting this chapter a little more, we learn that not only does Jodie have to deal with Iden, she also has to deal with other entities that somehow get through Iden and harass Jodie. She has to deal with her condition alone. She feels somewhat isolated. I started to build empathy towards the character. Even though she is being raised in a nice homely environment by her foster parents, they don't really understand her condition, as well as her foster dad not being as sympathetic as her foster mum. We're also given a taste of Iden's strength and power after what he did to that child on the street. Again, the chapter isn't very long, but it builds up Jodie's character as well as Iden's and what she has to go through on a daily basis. It is also building more evidence as to how Jodie had to end up at the facility with Nathan and Cole. It's putting all the pieces into place. That's another thing too. Even though we're under an hour into the game at this point, so much has gone on already. The pacing is very good thus far, but it will slow down later on, and I'll get into that when we come to it. Hence the name of this chapter. This is Jodie's first interview with Nathan Dawkins. After the events in the last chapter, Jodie's parents decided to look for help. Jodie enters the room and Nathan introduces himself. He explains to her that his job is to study events similar to hers and to come up with an explanation as to how and why they happen. After Nathan introduces himself, along with an introduction to his job title, we're given options to respond to Nathan, such as yes, no, or simply to shrug your shoulders. It's nice to again see a layer of choice, but why would Jodie not want to speak or converse properly with Dawkins? She wants rid of Iden, so I responded with yes once every question came up. Dawkins goes on to ask about Iden being an imaginary friend, and if he is with her all of the time and since birth. Jodie responds with yes. Nathan goes on to ask if he is some sort of spirit or ghost. Of course, Jodie isn't going to know that, so she shrugs in response. Dawkins asks if Jodie could draw Iden for him. Jodie obliges and sketches out what she sees, as well as what us the player sees. Nathan asks to see the drawing and analyses it. He goes on to ask if Iden is present right now and if he can do something. Iden shows his presence by knocking some files off of Nathan's desk. Nathan assumes that Iden is controlled under Jodie's command. Jodie says it is quite the opposite. Iden does his own thing and wishes he could be separated from Jodie, and obviously Jodie's feelings are mutual. Nathan questions the scratches on Jodie's arm and mentions if it is Iden who caused them. Jodie claims again it was the monsters. Clearly Nathan is quite taken back by all this, and that closes this chapter. Dawkins was very good with Jodie in this scene. He was very polite and took his time with Jodie, whilst not bombarding her with too many questions. The scene again is very well paced, being only about 4 minutes long. My only gripe is the dialogue choices. In the previous chapter, Jodie was very upset with Iden, so much so that I would go as far as saying she wants rid of him. So why would she not want to answer Nathan's questions? It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it does a great job of introducing us to Nathan and seeing how concerned he was over Jodie's condition. It shows he generally does care, maybe even more than her parents. Okay, well, yes, they did bring her to the facility, but as to why they did that will come clear later. The first night follows on a few days after the previous chapter. Jodie has been issued a room within the facility, in which I might as well name now the United States Department of Paranormal Activity, or abbreviated the DPA. She will be staying there for a few days under the watch of Nathan and Cole. Her mum reassures her that it definitely won't be for long. Jodie pleads not to be left there. Again, she reassures her they'll only be for a few days. Her mum does not seem to feel very guilty about leaving her there, whilst her dad is trying to usher his wife out the door. Jodie's foster parents leave the room, and Nathan has a word with Jodie.
Jodie, I know it's hard leaving your home and your family, but here we have a better chance of understanding what's happening. We can find a way to protect you.
Nobody can protect me.
Your belongings are in that bag over there. Cole and I are right next door. If you need anything or if anything's wrong, just call and we'll come right away. Okay? Good night, Jodie.
He does a great job of reassuring Jodie, because obviously this is a lot for a young child to be going through. We don't know how old she actually is here, maybe 6? Either way, William Dafoe did a great job in this clip. Nathan treats Jodie like his own. Jodie says that nobody will be able to protect her. Nathan leaves the room to let Jodie get settled. Aiden clips through to next door and witnesses this conversation.
No, Nathan, we can't take it anymore. First, there was the invisible friend she keeps talking to, right? And then there was stuff moving around the house by itself, and now these things that are attacking her in the middle of the night.
Philip, I know it's difficult, but
You don't understand. We're done. We quit. Hey, tell her we had to go away. I don't even really care, but there is no way she's coming back home with us. Okay, we want our normal life
just
back.
a child. You're the only family she's got. She needs you. You can't dump her just like that.
She'll get over it. But we are done pretending. Okay? Now you tell her, or I'll tell her.
Give me some time. Let me figure it out.
You don't take too long, Nathan. Come on, Susan.
It is apparently clear Jodie's foster parents are not leaving Jodie here for just a few days, but indefinitely. They are walking away. Some foster parents they are. Even her mum, in which I thought was taking the more remorseful approach, wants out too. Nathan is clearly disappointed in the pair, but he has no choice but to accept their wishes. We then switch back to Jodie, who can now start to get ready for bed. She changes and grabs some of her belongings and heads to bed. Cole states over the tannoy he'll be turning out the lights. Jodie quickly requests that he leaves the last hallway light on. She lays down and once again tries to reassure Aiden that nothing will happen. Jodie struggles to get to sleep, so requests to Aiden that she needs a story. Aiden turns on her torch and begins a shadow show. Just as she's about to settle down, an entity comes out of nowhere and attacks Jodie. We finally get a proper look at them. Aiden rushes to get help. He manages to get Cole's attention next door. Aiden goes back into Jodie's room in order to help her. Aiden can use his launch ability to get the entities off of Jodie. Luckily, the event soon subsides. Nathan and Cole rush into the room to check on Jodie, and that closes the chapter. As you can see, this narrative isn't getting any less sadder for Jodie. Again, I really felt for her. Just a young child, and her only family is walking out on her, without her even knowing. But again, Nathan and Cole do a great job of caring for her. so I think they will be the only family she needs from now on anyway. Following on from the previous chapter, we see the quote, monsters. Similar to the prologue, it's kept a mystery, but in this chapter, we saw what Jodie has to deal with most nights before sleeping. There are clearly entities somehow getting through from the infraworld. Luckily, Nathan and Cole have plenty of time to work out as to how it happens. This chapter takes place maybe a few days after the previous one, in which Jodie spent her first night under Nathan and Cole's care. It is clear, hence the chapter's name, Jodie's parents are parting ways with her.
I don't know how to tell you this, Jodie, so I'm just going to tell you. Your mom and I, we've been transferred. We have to leave the base. We really want to take you with us, but we think... Everyone thinks that it would be better for you to stay here with Professor Dawkins. Of course, we'll come to see you whenever it's possible, and when you're better, you'll join us in our new home. Okay? Well, I think it's for the best. Goodbye, dear.
Be brave, darling. I know this is difficult. I'm sure it'll work out.
We gotta go, Susan.
Just give me a minute, Philip.
That's enough. Come on.
Of course her dad tries to play this off as a temporary measure, but I don't think Jodie is that stupid. Again, her mum seems more sympathetic, but if she was that concerned, she would stay there with her, or not completely abandon hope. The scene takes place from Aiden's perspective. Once the couple go to leave the room, we're given the option to choke Jodie's father. In my first playthrough, I didn't hesitate, but in the footage you're seeing here, I was reluctant. I could see in this scene that Jodie was upset. I thought I'd better not choke her dad this time. Her parents leave. Nathan does a great job again in reassuring her. Even though again this wasn't a very long chapter, with only 2 choices, it again develops Jodie's character, and causes the player to walk in her shoes even further. The only people in her life, her only family, just walked out on her, when she needed them most. We're now a fair few years on, and Jodie is now a teenager. Nathan drops her off to a birthday party that she apparently begged Nathan in order to attend, but she is now having doubts. She is worried about not knowing anyone there, and her attire isn't exactly up to snuff. She of course is going to have some social anxiety. She has been isolated for so long because of her condition. Nathan asks her to relax and just enjoy the party. When I was younger, I always used to hate having to attend social events on my own. I always felt like a deer in the headlights. I always felt like I just had to face the music, so to speak. So again, I know exactly how Jodie is feeling in this scene. She leaves Nathan's car and approaches the door. A woman answers, who welcomes her in. Clearly isn't her party, but her daughter's, Kristen, who later on in life went on to pursue a career in Detroit. Anyway, I knew right from the outset that she would be a typical stuck-up teenager by her attitude towards Jodie's gift. Jodie heads into the house and Kristen begins to introduce Jodie to her friends, again in a rather rude / stuck-up attitude. One of her friends asks why she's in quote Unit 4 and what she gets up to there. Before Jodie gets a chance to respond, Kristen butts in and dishes out the orders on what she wants her friends to do. Jodie is given the responsibility of putting on the music. Jodie channels her inner rock chick and sticks on some rock. The decision wasn't influenced by me at all. Honest. But one of Kristen's friends decides to put something on from a different genre. Typical. Kristen re-enters the room with some alcohol and offers Jodie some. Jodie declines and everyone branches off into their own groups, which is common in parties. Jodie decides to sit down and people watch, I guess, until Matt, from London, sits next to her.
I used to live in London before I moved here 2 years ago.
Oh, Sergeant Angel, someone from London called for you. I'll tell him you'll ring him back.
I decided to attempt to get Jodie to try and be sociable, but whilst being careful not to reveal her life or condition, suddenly a slow song comes on and Matt asks Jodie to dance. I thought it'd be nice to see Jodie finally be able to interact with people her own age. She joins Matt on the dance and the pair get a little carried away after throwing some compliments at each other. Once the dance is over, one of Kristen's friends gathers everyone around and asks Jodie to do a demo of her quote, super mega powers. Sure that wasn't cringy trying to say that. Anyway, another friend says there's a lot of, and again I quote, bull. I think you can feel the rest in yourself. Now on my first playthrough I refused, but knowing now what comes after, I decided to show off Aiden to them to see if it would change anything. Aiden comes into the scene and blows out some candles, turns on the hi-fi and knocks some chairs and tables, in which scares the teens. Jodie apologises and reaffirms that, well, that's what they wanted to see after all. Kristen changes the subject and gets everyone to sit down while she opens her gifts. She opens one from her friends and then gets to Jodie's. Nathan gave Jodie a book of poetry that's 50 years old. Now I know it's the thought that counts, but that probably wasn't the best gift idea, Nathan. More or less immediately, Kristen and her cronies reject and mock the gift. The situation escalates and the whole group begin to pick on Jodie, with Matt quoting,
She's been following me around like a puppy all evening, begging for it.
Oh, and she's a slut too. I never wanted to invite her. My mom made me.
Yeah, she's a slut. A slut and a witch.
Sorry Matty boy, but you approached Jodie first, and you made the first move on the kiss. So why don't you just piss off back to London with your terrible English accent? Not that mine is any better, but besides the point. Now this is where I see some continuity problems with this chapter. Bear in mind, minutes before this, Jodie showed off Aiden's capability, and they were all quivering in their boots. Then suddenly they're all brave, and carry out Jodie and bundle her under the stairs. Doesn't make much sense, does it? Maybe they could have said they were scared for the hell of it, but what Jodie did would shock anyone, unless she is a hired magician or something, but clearly she's not. They're also clearly aware of what she can do because they know she's in the DPA. And why didn't they think it was a good idea to do this in the first place? Surely they would know Aiden could bust Jodie out of there and he could turn around and kill all of them quicker than they could blink. Well, teenage minds I guess, still not fully developed? What would have been more grounded in this situation is to figure out an excuse to get her to leave or cancel the party, if they didn't really want her there or were scared of her. But regardless of what you choose to show Aiden's powers or not, this scene still plays out the same, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. After this scene, once Aiden rescues Jodie from under the stairs, we are given a choice to leave or take revenge. On my first playthrough, I was genuinely angry. Even though all of this narrative and its characters are fictional, I wanted revenge for Jodie so desperately. I've been in situations like this back in my teen years, and I know what it's like. Obviously it wasn't over any spiritual powers or anything, but you get what I'm saying. I felt so angry for Jodie. I was so upset for her. She tried so hard to fit in, but in the end, I decided to be the bigger person. I made Jodie be the bigger person, and simply walk away. This chapter opens, I'm guessing, a few years later. Jodie is arguing with Nathan as she wants to go out with her friends and, well, live a normal life like everyone else. Nathan reminds her that she isn't like everyone else. I didn't get why Nathan is so reluctant to let Jodie out now. He let her go to the birthday party unsupervised in the previous chapter. Elliot Page did a great job in this scene. He portrayed Jodie's emotions really well, whilst also keeping in line with the character's age, in making it almost come across as a justified tantrum. Nathan was a little harsh in stating she will never be like them. I thought the whole part of his job was to work out what was going on with her and maybe to even cure her of the problem. That was a bit uncalled for Nathan. Props to Willem Dafoe too. All through the game thus far, we've seen him be very reassuring, understanding, and even lenient with Jodie up until this point. This is the first time we've seen Nathan put his foot down and get stern with Jodie. Willem played it well, and being a seasoned actor, there's no surprise. Nathan leaves the room and leaves Cole with the short end of the stick. Poor bugger. He has to deal with Jodie's protest, a killer guitar shred the inner metalhead in me approved. This generally did make me laugh for the first and only time this whole game. Jodie does try to eventually play nice with Cole, but it gets nowhere. Cole obviously understands her frustration, but his hands are tied. He has to answer to Nathan. A little side note here too. I like the way Jodie's room has changed as she has gotten older. Posters on the wall, the drawings, the guitar. It gives you a glimpse into her personality and how she has obviously had to make the place home. I do love that Jodie's protests are relatable. The pacing up and down, the punching of the bed, the finding something else to do while stopping a few seconds after. It's all what we've done in the past when we've been grounded or something similar. Again, Elliot played the scene really well. Aiden begins his own protest by knocking the cameras and damaging items in the room. I decided to stop damaging the room because I realised what's the point in damaging Jodie's personal belongings. Jodie more or less read my mind and states the same to Aiden, so we decide to try something else. Now if you played the game in the way it was intended, this won't be a surprise to you, but if you're playing in order, what happens here is truly baffling. It actually backs up Nathan's points from earlier. Aiden takes control of Cole. Yup, it did just happen. When it happened to me on my first playthrough, I said to myself, oh, now I get why she's considered dangerous. Just when I thought Aiden was powerful enough, he pulls this. It did make me chuckle though, because obviously Jodie is feeling all guilty and apologising to Cole, but obviously he has no clue as to what is going on. Jodie manages to get out of the building with Cole after a close call with security. I actually noticed in this scene the year is 2006 too. A bit of useless information there, but I'd been wondering on the timeline. So I guess the current timeline occurs in 2013. Anyway, I digress. The year in which these scenes take place is irrelevant, as all we need to know is if Jodie is younger or older in these chapters to tell where we are in the story. Cole also even drives Jodie to her destination. Well, Aiden does. And yes, I decided to hide in the boot of the car, because why not? Nearing the destination, Aiden stops the car and lets Jodie out. Jodie again apologises to Cole. She then asks Aiden to take him into the forest so he's safe. Not the best idea, Jodie. Why not put him back in his car? Didn't really get Jodie's decision on that. She could have easily walked off, then got Aiden to free him, and he would have been safe in his car. Anyway, in the next scene, Jodie has arrived at her destination, a small bar in the middle of nowhere. It's clear when she enters, her friends are not there, so it's either she's got the wrong bar, or her so-called friends have stitched her up again. Jodie decides to sit and await their arrival. The landlord approaches and asks how old she is. Jodie responds with 21, but she just wants a lemonade. That's normally my choice of beverage when I'm out at the pub too, as I'm normally the driver. Now, as I've probably mentioned 10 times already, I've spent a lot of time in this game so far putting myself in Jodie's shoes, and when I entered this small dingy bar, well, I've seen worse, but I still had this unsettling feeling. When the two men playing pool left, it left Jodie, the landlord, and two punters at the bar, who kept looking over at her. Now, you don't have to be an expert in body language to work out what these two blokes are saying and or thinking. I've only played this chapter twice, obviously, so I don't know how many paths there are. In my first playthrough, I thought the punters were concerned that she was there alone, and I wondered what would happen if I stayed sat down, but I eventually stood up and went to the toilets in both playthroughs. In my first playthrough, I left the toilets and accidentally headed for the pool table, in which drew more attention to Jodie. In my second, as you're seeing here, I went for the jukebox. What I would like to have seen is if you can actually leave the bar. Is that a path you can take? Let me know in the comments. Even though I went to the jukebox, Todd still approaches Jodie and offers a game of pool. I wondered where Alice and Cara were. Must have been around somewhere. Oh, sorry, wrong title. I did try to decline, but it would seem no matter what I don't have a choice in this scene. We start to play pool with the individual. He asks what she is doing here on her own. Now, I think I chose the wrong speech choices here, but again I think the scene plays out the same regardless of your choice. He then goes on to ask Jodie's age, in which she answers truthfully. Again, probably the wrong choice on my part. Sorry, Jodie. He then goes on to ask if her parents know she's there. Again, I picked the wrong choice. Now, I must stipulate again, you don't have to be a body language analyst in order to foresee what is coming. This scumbag attempts to take advantage of Jodie. This is what I was loosely referring to earlier when I had a bad feeling when it was just Jodie sat there alone. We're given options on how to quickly deal with this. For me, it had to be a slap in the face. I knew Jodie would get a hit back, but I knew thankfully and predictably Aiden would step in, and thankfully he did. He starts tearing the place to bits, throwing furniture at the attackers in the process. They soon lose their nerve and run for the exit. I wasn't going to let them get away that easily. Now, I know this might seem unusual to some, or to a non-gamer, but if you're a dedicated gamer like myself and have played many narrative-driven games, such as The Last of Us for example, you might be able to empathise with me on this. Because we've been following Jodie since a child, we develop this caring nature towards her and get invested in the characters we spend lots of time with, especially when the game directors and writers actually take the time and develop the characters. It gives us this sense of having the responsibility to protect her. I had so much invested in this character, I felt like an enraged parent and my fight or flight reactions kicked in. Now, for the record, I don't have any children, but most of my friends who are parents say to me they will obviously do anything to protect their child. And again, as strange as it sounds, I had these sort of feelings running through my mind and body when playing this scene. I wanted these attackers dead. There's not a lot of games that have gotten me that invested before, other than The Last of Us, and there is something to be said about that. Just like I aforementioned, I wasn't going to let these attackers get away with it. Aiden jumps straight in and locks the doors. Then best of all, it's gruesome but justified, Aiden takes control of the landlord, he grabs his firearm, shoots the other two dead, then along with himself. Great job, Aiden. I steered him in the right direction. A great conclusion to this chapter. Remember, boys, we're meant to set the example. Look after our women we share this world with. Separate yourself from the scum. Make our women feel safe and not afraid. With that being said, Nathan and Cole rush into the scene. Good to see Cole made it back safe too. Now, in a way, this scene might back up Nathan's points about Jodie not being like everyone else. and again shows just how much damage she can cause, but it was completely justified in this instance, is because she hasn't been allowed out into the world, she has had no experience or learning people skills. I hate using that word, but if she were to be allowed out to socialise more, she would have been able to tell that the characters in the bar weren't going to be friendly. She would have had a better idea of her surroundings, so in a way Nathan as well as Cole are to blame on the events that occurred in this chapter. This chapter starts with Nathan waking Jodie up. It must be important if he is waking her in the middle of the night. Jodie, rightfully so, asks what is going on. Nathan keeps coy and says he'll explain in the car. In the car now, he goes on to state that the DPA have a program to study the other side, in what is commonly referred to in this game as the infraworld. They created a machine known as the condenser. Its job is that it opens a rift in which leads to what lies beyond. Jodie immediately, intrigued, asks how they finally did it, opening a passage into Aiden's world. Nathan goes on to deliver the bad news. Somehow, entities, like what attacked Jodie as a child, have managed to get their way through this rift, in which of course has allowed them into the real world, our dimension, and conveniently everyone in the building dedicated to this condenser has been killed by the entities, and none of the rescue teams made it out either. The DPA called and asked for Jodie's help. Nathan states to Jodie he tried to explain to them that she is too young, and that it is a very high risk operation. He doesn't seem to have made much of a case against it though, has he? He is literally driving her there, and he says it is too dangerous for her. But Nathan believes, as well as the DPA, that Jodie is the only one who can shut down this condenser. Now obviously we did deal with entities crossing into Jodie's dimension through Aiden, hence why we got a few scenes in the earlier chapters showcasing them. It was to build up to this chapter, and the ones that follow later. But this condenser is an actual passage to the other side, so who's to say there might be other entities coming through that Jodie and Aiden are yet to face? And who's to say they'll be able to stop this at all? Approaching the scene now, whilst passing a UK road closed sign in the United States, just a small observation, Nathan gives Jodie a choice to decline, but again he literally just said it's too dangerous. Make up your mind, man. Jodie calmly agrees to it. Okay, well deep down she's probably bricking it. Now for me, this has to be the weakest entry to a chapter in this game thus far. I'm not questioning Elliott's or Williams' acting, but they were working on what they had to go on, but I'm more questioning David Cage's writing. I'm not saying I would have done a better job, but Nathan clearly cares about Jodie, right? Himself and Cole have basically raised her. Nathan most likely treats her like his own, like I aforementioned way back in the starting chapters. So why is he willingly letting her go on a quest she most likely won't return from? Even though he gave her a choice when they pulled up, he almost peer pressured Jodie into proceeding as they were already there. He also didn't put up much of a fight in talking the DPA out of wanting to use Jodie in this situation. If Nathan truly cares and was given no choice by the DPA, he would have woken Jodie, explained everything, and then given her the choice. The choice should have been given to the players. If we decline, then Nathan could try to cover for Jodie. Then when Jodie sees what is happening, maybe through live TV of the entities getting out, then maybe she would change her mind and head for the condenser. And if we agree, the game progresses from where it does here. I just found the introduction convoluting, as well as Nathan's decisions were out of character, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen of him at this point. Moving on, Jodie exits the car and Cole is on site, and rightfully so yells at Nathan for letting her enter the building. Approaching the entrance, we're teased with the danger that lurks ahead.
This is a nightmare. Let me see. Why did she do that? Going to be okay, sir. What could that be? Look like? They're not telling us everything.
These levels, nobody else should go. There's no way to control this.
The condenser is in the lower basement. You need to find the control room. That's all they could tell me. Jody, the entities around the rift, they're not like Iden. They're from the depths of the other side. We know almost nothing about them.
Nathan briefs us that we have to find the control room on the lower levels. That is all he was told. He goes on to confirm what I literally just said. These entities are not like the ones Jody and Iden have had to face. No one knows anything about these new types. So, again, how did the DPA and Nathan confidently know that Jody is the right person for the job if she's never faced these entities before? It makes no sense. It's a very noticeable flaw in the writing. Maybe that's a little harsh, but to me, it feels like something was overlooked whilst this opening scene was planned out in production. Okay, yes, Jody responds with,
I've been living with an entity that I know nothing about since the day I was born. I get it. Don't worry. I don't plan on dying today.
So in a way, she says to Nathan, how hard can it be? But it still doesn't fix the convoluted opener. Right, enough about the opening scene. Jody makes her way into the building and works her way through the various floors in order to learn what happened. She can do this interesting thing with the help of Iden, where she can scan deceased bodies and see flashbacks to what happened. The controls in order to get this to work are a little clunky, but it's rewarding when you get it right. Most of the casualties are scientists. That kind of goes without saying, to be honest. On one particular floor, she manages to find a live scientist hiding in cover. He jumps out, clearly traumatised, and asks Jody to go away. Jody explains she is there to help. He tells her the entities made it into the labs and that they're still around. Jody tells the lab coat to run for the elevator. He warns that those things will kill her. She states she's not alone. The lab coat responds with,
We always face death alone.
the hard reality, I guess. And he goes to leave, and yep, you guessed it, an entity takes control of him, in which almost leads to a boss fight. Well, a watered down version in reality. It mostly consists of QuickTime events, moving the joystick to the direction of the arrows on screen. I've always been happy with QuickTime events in Quantic Dream's titles. It keeps the suspense as well as keeping you engaged. However, with Beyond Two Souls, because we have to concentrate on where to move the joystick, we actually miss a lot of what is going on. I missed out on half of the fight scenes because I was too busy looking out for what button or move came next. And for me, on occasion, it actually pulled me out of the scene. And for me, it happens too often throughout the game. Maybe they should have just stuck with button presses, or simple up, down, left, right swipes, or a simple rotation or click for the joysticks, rather than a diagonal movement, because the player feels they have to be so precise with their movements, they miss what is going on in the scene. This was much improved upon in Detroit Become Human. Once Jody defeats the lab coat, she proceeds further down into the building. The entities try to stop her in another mild QuickTime event. After passing this, she finds herself in a cryo chamber, surrounded by more deceased lab coats, so she thought she'd better stay frosty. Okay, that was a cheap one. Let me off. That wasn't part of the script. All we know is that she is close to the condenser. It's on the other side of that door. Typically, the door needs a pass card in order to be accessed, so we must now search the bodies until we find one. Bit of a needle in a haystack when all their coats are white, and the pass card is white, and the ice is, well, white. So it's pretty difficult to spot, but the game does help slightly. Hint, it's the bloke chilling near the light. No pun intended, I swear. Once Jody takes the card, we transfer into an episode of The Walking Dead. All the bodies quickly rise. Obviously, this is the entity's work again. Jody manages to escape them for the moment and quickly rushes to the door, while Iden covers her. Again, it's a great moment of suspense. Once through the door, there it is, the condenser, running at full power with the rift open in the middle. Entities are everywhere. Immediately I thought, I've got to go out there, haven't I? I knew nothing in that control room would work, and I was right. Turns out there's another control room on the opposite side. Typical. It is also here I actually understood the DPA's and Nathan's concern, because if this were not to be shut off, those entities could cause chaos all over the planet, let alone in that one lab. But I'm still not defending how the opening scene was handled. Jodie decides to make a run for the console on the opposite side, and asks Aiden to protect her, in which I think he would anyway. The scene that follows is a great set piece, make no doubt about that. We play between Jodie and Aiden with some more QuickTime events thrown in. That's the third one in this chapter, but it feels more appropriate here. So after dodging entities, repelling entities, and nearly falling off catwalks, Jodie makes it to the control panel and hits the switch in order to shut down the condenser. But what this ends up causing is a self-destruction, as it sucks everything in the room in with it. Jodie literally hangs on for dear life as the condenser is shut down permanently. After the blast, Jodie can no longer sense Aiden's presence. She panics in thinking he was sucked into the blast, but he is still there, and you can see the relief on Jodie's face, showing to us that as Jodie has got older, she can maybe come to either care for Aiden or just embraced him as a part of her life, because as a child she wanted rid of him. Perhaps she may have a subconscious connection to Aiden. Jodie exits the building. Nathan is obviously relieved she is okay. Still shouldn't have sent her in there though. I still don't get that. Jodie tells Nathan that they never do anything like that again, because if they do, there will be nothing left. Now I know I usually ask you to remember a lot of things when I make these ridiculously long critiques, but please try to remember this line in going forward towards the end of the game, as it ties in with a point I will bring up much later. Separation opens again, I'm assuming a few years after the previous chapter. Nathan and Cole are running an experiment with Jodie. There are 3 items in front of her, what appears to be a jewellery box, a coin and a photograph. We're given the choice to pick one of the 3. I chose the jewellery box. We jump to Aiden in analysis mode. Once I get the controls to work, we jump to a very brief flashback of a child opening the box with Nathan present. It is definitely his daughter as well. She called him Dad. We're brought out of the flashback. Nathan asks if Jodie is okay and if she saw anything. I decided to let Jodie speak. She says she saw a girl, in which Nathan suddenly looks shocked and says, Laura. Perhaps this is his daughter that is since long deceased. Before we can truly understand the motives behind this experiment, the phone rings. Cole answers, and it would appear that someone is here to see Nathan. The game again does a great job of keeping the reasons behind this experiment quiet for now, but it will be tied in later on. Anyway, this person here to see Nathan is Ryan Clayton. Nathan doesn't seem too happy about his arrival. He leaves the room seeming very cagey, and not Nicolas Cage either. Ugh, sorry, that's just another awful unscripted joke. Of course, here is where we can use Aiden to our advantage. We can listen in on the pair's conversation.
Listen, I never get around to telling her I need more time.
No. Professor Dawkins, she needs to come with me today. I have my orders.
Christ, she's only a child. My assistant and I are the only family she's got. She doesn't have any idea what's out there.
Look, Dawkins, I see your side of it. All right, I do. But orders are orders, right? You gonna bring her to me, or do I have to go and get her?
Jodie, could you come here, please?
What's going on, Nathan? You look upset.
Jody, this is Ryan Clayton from the CIA. The agency wants you to join their military school program at Camp Perry. Ryan's going to take care of you from now on. You have to go with him, Jody. Today.
I don't understand. Why me?
This unit belongs to the CIA. They've been tracking your case ever since you arrived. They know what you and Aiden can do.
I'm begging you, Nathan. Please don't let them take me away.
Hey, Jody, I know. It's difficult, but you need to understand, this is a great opportunity for you.
I don't care what you think. I'm not going anywhere.
Jesus, listen up, Miss Holmes. I don't give a shit about your pathetic adolescent pouting, all right? You can rant and rave all you want, but you'll shut your mouth and do as you're told.
Go fuck yourself.
That's it. Let's go. Come here.
Jody, no. Jody, stop immediately. Please. Do this for me.
I'll go get my things.
Only the essentials. We've got everything you need at Camp Perry.
So it is clear that Nathan knew that Ryan would be taking Jody to the CIA, but he chose not to tell her. Jody has every right to be upset. She's getting a repeat of what happened to her as a child, except it is her who has to leave this time. But again, she wasn't informed. She is having to leave everything she knows again, her family. Even though the DPA is owned by the CIA, I still think Dawkins could have done more to stop this from happening. He could have made up some story about how dangerous it would be for them to take Jody on at this training school. I know they want to make her into a fighting machine, but look how unstable Aiden can be. Jody herself said it's hard to keep him under control. I'm glad she got to have the last word with Ryan though. She certainly put him in his place. He was not at all caring about her situation at all. The only reason that she agrees is because Nathan asks that she does it for him. Remember the condenser, Nathan? Again, I think at least this once he should have done something to prevent this. Without sounding melodramatic, but surely stopping that condenser was enough for the DPA and CIA. She literally saved the world from entities entering into their dimension. But yeah, do this for me, Jody. Yeah, thanks Nathan. Some surrogate father you are. When Jody starts to collect her things, I again felt this sense of having to protect her. I got this feeling of sadness, anxiety. It's horrible having to leave somewhere without your consent, having to leave everything that you know. I thought to myself, when is Jody actually going to get a break? Some positivity in her life. We're at least maybe 3 to 5 hours into the game at this point, and nothing has gone Jody's way yet. After collecting her belongings, we say an emotional goodbye to Nathan and Cole. She is being forced to leave her family that she has known for probably well over 10 years at this point. We still don't know how old Jody is at this point, maybe 19? But again, her age is irrelevant. But imagine having to leave your family to have to serve in an organisation you don't want to be a part of. It's almost like being enlisted for war. The chapter closes with Jody and Ryan leaving the DPA. Years of research drawing to a close. Jody may never find out how and why Aiden is by her side, and if she will ever be able to live a normal life. This chapter is, well, you guessed it, the next path in Jodie's life, training at the CIA. Now I know she had no choice but to become a CIA operative, but considering she rightfully so kicked up a fuss, she actually throws everything into the training regime. I thought this chapter would be her trying to escape or refusing to do tasks, etc. But she literally spends 3 years throwing herself into it and excelling in the combat training and many other traits. Maybe she thought, well, what the hell, maybe some good can come of this. Spoilers, it won't. But again, I did find it strange that she did a complete 180 the minute she got there. Now obviously most of this chapter is a tutorial for more combat moves and controls with Jodie as well as Aiden, in which we will no doubtedly use in later chapters. I mean, in a way, it was good Jodie threw herself into it to prove she is not weak and can be independent, as the training was very tough. And that's all I can really say about this chapter. It's nothing really groundbreaking, it's mostly just a tutorial, at least at first glance, but it does highlight mechanics you might need later on into the narrative. But again, some weaker writing and or planning bleeds through on Jodie's unexpected U-turn when she arrived. I half expected her to be homesick, but it was quite the opposite. So the embassy is technically Jodie's first assignment with the CIA, in which I believe takes place in the current timeline, in which would be 2013. Jodie and Ryan pose as a couple, or acquaintances, who knows really. They're attending a party in, well, an embassy. Ryan compliments Jodie in the dress that she doesn't like, as you do. Anyway, he reminds her to keep a low profile. The host of the party approaches the pair and speaks to Ryan. Ryan introduces Jodie as Elizabeth, and Jodie does what Ryan asks, and doesn't say a word. They walk off and Ryan starts to blend in, and asks Jodie to find somewhere quiet in order to carry out what she has to do. She heads to the toilet, finds a cubicle, and digs out a notepad and pen, and calls on Aiden. We switch to Aiden and go to investigate this safe. There is added pressure in this scene, as Jodie states it hurts when he is too far away. It makes us the player feel some sort of urgency in order to get this done. I was also worried about security finding Jodie in the toilets, so we make our way up to this room and find a switch to open the safe behind the painting. I found the switch, opened the drawer, but accidentally forgot to deal with the guard on camera watch first. Once I dealt with him, I managed to get into the safe and retrieve what we needed. Again, it isn't explained what we need this for, nor what it is all about. I think it is just a general assignment for the CIA. On a side note, I liked how Jodie had the ability to write down what Aiden is seeing. It was quite impressive. Once Jodie is back in control, it is clear the time Aiden took has taken a toll on her. What doesn't help is what I guessed would happen, happened. Security is knocking on the door, saying what I don't know, the language isn't subtitled. A woman enters and I assume says to him that he shouldn't be in a female restroom. The woman enters the cubicle, not sure how because Jodie locked it from the inside. Anyway, she says she can't help and takes all of Jodie's notes. And was this woman in on the assignment? Again, we never really know nor find out. Jodie leaves the toilets and finds Ryan. She is severely weakened. I'm guessing it puts a strain on her brain. Maybe it causes a migraine. Again, all of this would have been nice if Dawkins works all this out, but he decided to kind of sell her out to the agency. Once finding Ryan, the pair leave. Now if I'm honest, maybe I've completely missed something here, but I'm still trying to work out why this chapter actually exists. Yes, it's well paced, and I don't inherently dislike anything about it, I just don't know what it contributes to the narrative, because I'm fairly sure no later chapter includes the information we sourced. I purely think it's just an example as to why the CIA wanted Jodie on board. They can use her and Aiden as a secret weapon as such, the ultimate spy. It also serves as a teaser as to what Aiden can do when you first play the game, as it was intended. As this chapter happens quite early on, so I think this was a chapter that could have been seen as a showcase. Like I say, maybe I'm completely wrong, and other alternative paths might reveal something different. Now I'll be honest, this chapter is one of the longest and not very well paced out of the previous I've covered so far. It is one of those chapters I feel where the game needs to hold your hand a little, otherwise you're forever going round in circles, as you'll see in a moment. The chapter opens with Jodie watching some television in a very fancy looking flat. Her phone rings and it's Ryan, asking if she got his email. Turns out she's been experiencing some minor glitches with her computer. Then the camera pans to her laptop. That doesn't look very minor to me. Apparently it was an invite to dinner, and tonight was supposed to be that night. Jodie apologises. She instead invites Ryan over for dinner instead. Now maybe this is something the game will elaborate on later, but how come Jodie, at least to me, gives off signals that she has a thing for Ryan? First time she met him, they obviously got on like a house on fire.
Jesus, listen up, Miss Holmes. I don't give a shit about your pathetic adolescent pouting, all right? You can rant and rave all you want, but you'll shut your mouth and do as you're told.
Go fuck yourself.
That's it. Let's go. Come here.
Then during the CIA training, we didn't see anything of them together, building any sort of friendship. Maybe they have been developing something that the player hasn't seen in between the chapters that we're playing. Also, not that it matters, but there's quite an age gap between the two. But then again, if you're an adult, age is just a number, I guess. I just found this all strange. It would have been nice if we could have seen some development between the two before this scene starts. It easily could have been included in this chapter. Jodie says to Ryan to arrive for around 8 PM. She hangs up the phone and we put into Aiden's perspective. Turns out Aiden broke Jodie's laptop. Clearly he doesn't want things progressing between the two.
Now I get why you blasted my computer. You didn't want me to see Ryan. It's not your call, Aiden. I can do what I want. Fuck this. Fuck this! We're not gonna start this again. I'm not yours, Aiden. I can have a relationship with whoever I want. This is my life. Oh, do you fucking hear me? This is my life. You know what? I happen to think Ryan is great. Right? He's charming, he's intelligent, he's funny. And I think I'm falling for him. Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware of what happened at the bar. Fuck you for reminding me. Ryan is not like that.
Now it is clear Jodie's patience is wearing thin with Aiden. It's reminding her that he is always there no matter what. That must be hard to deal with, and like she says, it is her life. I personally don't get why she's fond of Ryan, but if that's what she wants, then why should Aiden stand in her way? To be honest, after all the crap she's had to endure so far, it would actually be nice to see her happy for a change, so I personally went with it for Jodie's sake. Right, so moving on, it's 7 o'clock, and we've got to cook dinner, tidy the flat, and get changed. Ryan is arriving at 8, so if you're a gamer, you'll know an hour in video game time is maybe around 10 minutes, so the player feels this sense of urgency to get these tasks done. But here's the problem, navigating Jodie's flat is a nightmare. Like I may or may not have mentioned earlier, with a lot of these narrative driven titles, we have no control over the gameplay camera. As the character moves, the camera automatically moves to a new static location, in which can throw you off course, so I really struggled moving around in this area. I wish in a way this game took the approach to other third-person titles in regards to camera control, like the Grand Theft Auto series for example. Those titles give you full camera control. I get these games are meant to be a full cinematic experience, but some scenes would really benefit from a free camera. Furthermore, whilst we're struggling to navigate round, we have to tidy the flat, and this is where I wish the game would have held my hand a little bit. I struggled finding and selecting the items to tidy. Honestly, there is about 10 minutes added to this chapter from my struggle finding stuff to tidy, or to put out, or to put away. Of course, Aiden doesn't help by interrupting. Once everything was cleaned up, I started on the dinner. The cooking controls weren't so bad. It was more working out what to do in between. I was just waltzing around. I would have liked to hint on what to do next at least. Don't get me wrong, I do like to use my brain when playing video games now and then. I don't always inherently like hand holding. However, how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to be doing next? Or how am I going to know where the plates and cutlery are kept? After all, this is Jodie's residence. She should know, but instead, she's just walking around lost in her own flat. It kind of breaks the immersion for me. She's meant to be in a rush, as we are too, to get this all ready in one in-game hour, so it would have helped if everything was marked with the circle, regardless of distance, because the circles only show up when you're in close proximity. Like I say, I got the dinner cooking, and I was wondering what to do next. Admittedly, I missed the prompt to grab the stool, in order to carry on with the cooking, but to be fair it wasn't very clear, so I decided to get Jodie changed. I found this funny with the elegant look in which I chose. She wears the dress from the embassy that she didn't like. So why did she keep it then? Anyway, Ryan liked it, so I guess that doesn't matter. I also didn't fall for Aiden's doorbell trick this time either. I then went on to carry on cooking the food, whilst in the dress. Yep, that was a good job on my part. But hey, at least I found what I needed in order to make the scene progress. Oh, and also, it's nearly impossible for some reason to add any spices to the food. I picked up pepper, or salt for example, went to the command that the game asked for, and Jodie puts it straight back down. So, I decided to leave that. Who needs flavouring anyway? After that's done, it's back to wandering around the flat. I put some music on this time, which was nice. On my first playthrough, they sat there in silence, in which wasn't awkward at all. I found some candles and lit them, in which Aiden blows out in protest. So if you notice, after lighting them for the second time, after some more wandering around, I noticed the clock. It's 8:30. Ryan is supposed to be here at 8. Now either he is late, or the game was making us rush for no reason. Clearly there is no time limit on this chapter, and good job too. Eventually, again, by wandering around, I found some washing up to be done, all while still in the dress. And finally, Ryan arrives, after nearly 20 minutes of pacing around. Before answering the door, she asks Aiden to behave, and that this is important to her. In a way, this is a request to the player also as well. We have to control Aiden too, through at least 80% of the game. It is actually left up to us as to whether we disturb this moment for Jodie or not. I found this quite interesting, that it was left in our hands, because obviously Aiden was very dismissive of this going ahead. Jodie lets Ryan in and gets a corkscrew for the wine. Oh yeah, I forgot about the kitchen cabinet thing. Reminds me of that popular horror film franchise back in the late noughties / early 2010s. Can you guess the franchise? Once grabbing the corkscrew, Jodie opens the wine and pours out a glass. The pair cling glasses and celebrate Jodie's new apartment. I must admit, I've been thinking this whole time, how did she manage to afford this apartment? And how come she is now allowed to live alone? Is she now considered safe now she is an adult, or is it an agreement with the CIA after the information she grabbed at the embassy? On my first playthrough, I never even gave this a thought. As the scene progresses, it was the agency who found and presumably funded the flat. More small talk carries on between the pair. It is at this time, if you wish, you can disrupt the pair, as we're currently in Aiden's perspective. I decided to let the scene play uninterrupted. I thought it would be interesting to see what happens if you do interrupt though. Jodie gets up to check on the food and Ryan sits at the table. Jodie starts to serve the food and it turns out I picked the right dish. Ryan likes Asian food. I just hope he likes it with no flavour. Like I aforementioned, the game didn't like me adding any flavours at all. The pair chat over dinner and again we're given the option to interrupt. I did find it strange that Ryan says they've been working together for 2 years and that he knows nothing about her. So how come he clearly has a thing for her? Love works in strange ways, I suppose. Ryan goes on to ask about Aiden, and if Nathan ever worked out the link Jodie has with Aiden. Well, no, because if you remember, Ryan, you took her away to make her into a prototype weapon, or the ultimate spy. He never let Nathan continue his research, in which carried on Jodie's struggles. Why Jodie didn't mention this, I don't know. Maybe because she likes him too? But still a bit of a potential plot hole there. Well, more in the writing maybe. Ryan goes on to ask if he's in the room with them listening. Jodie very honestly and innocently answers, yeah, in which causes Ryan to go quiet momentarily. I think anyone would if they heard that, especially if you didn't know.
It's like, is he here now, listening to us?
Yeah. Yeah, he never leaves me.
Jodie realises this and quickly changes the subject and asks Ryan some questions about his family and relationships, and asks if he is married. If she thought he was, she shouldn't have invited him round, but I'll leave that there. Ryan flips the question to Jodie and asks if she's keeping her eye on someone. She replies with the world's worst convincing no ever. But she does say that with Aiden in her way, so to speak, it does make things complicated. Now Ryan starts to make the first move, just addressing the elephant in the room head on. We're given an option to reject or embrace. I felt if I just straight out rejected, it wouldn't make sense, as we spent this whole chapter basically setting up a date with Ryan, as Jodie is fond of him. As she said herself at the start, I went through with the kiss because, well, I for once just wanted to see her happy. Yeah, Ryan isn't the best bloke in the world, but he seems caring enough, at least at the moment. Yes, I'm still annoyed that he dragged her away from the DPA, but I guess he was just following orders. The pair start to get intimate, but Jodie decides not to proceed any further and apologises to Ryan. She states that there are some things she cannot forget. Now I think she can be relating to two things. It's either a flashback of PTSD from the bar all those years back, although Ryan is clearly not like that, or it's referring back to when he made her leave the DPA. Overall, this chapter felt like a bit of a drag though. The controls, like I say, are incredibly clunky, and the lack of camera control makes it worse. It doesn't progress the story a whole lot, and it's very badly paced. There were also the issues in the dialogue and holes in the writing. Maybe I'm again being too harsh, as there are other options I can take. I did find it interesting that 70% of players on Steam took the path of leaving Jodie and Ryan alone. Perhaps it is not just me that wants Jodie to be happy too. This chapter is based around another assignment with the CIA. Jodie is out in Somalia with Ryan as well as the military. The country is war-torn. We're briefed by Ryan that our mission is to take down one of the country's biggest warlords. He is controlling large parts of the city, in which he's stopping vital aid to civilians. We're told we're going in alone, whilst trying to avoid direct engagement with the enemy, and also with no backup, except an extraction once the job is done. Oh, and we've got until sunrise to get the job done. The typical cliche stuff. Jodie is confident she will make it back. She says more than just goodbye to Ryan, and sets off on this mission. Most of this chapter consists of gameplay, navigating through tight streets. We navigate as Jodie and deal with the enemy as Aiden. Jodie does have some input too. We end up making it to a hotel and do some more mind-reading flashbacks, and we learn that the warlord has left this area and proceeded further into the city near a ruined cathedral. Sneaking past the soldiers, we make it and enter a small room, and surprise, he's moved again. On my first playthrough, I thought this part of the chapter was very badly paced, but upon reflection watching back this footage, I realise its pacing is dependent on how you play through it. It almost becomes a third-person stealth game. Do I dare draw reference from Metal Gear Solid? Jodie proceeds to head to their rough location, until she stumbles across an injured child, wielding an AK-47. As you do. Obviously he is scared, and points the firearm at Jodie. With there being a language barrier, Jodie approaches carefully and heals the boy's wound with Aiden's abilities. I forgot to mention this in the Welcome to CIA chapter. Aiden has an ability to heal Jodie, and you guessed it, The controls are clunky and just awful. The boy appreciates Jodie's help and tries to introduce himself. His name is Salim. Jodie introduces herself too. Then miraculously, even though she made no noise, although yes she left some bodies, but she kept to the shadows and we get ambushed. I mean, really? We have to deal with the ambushers in order to progress, but the scene does really well again with Jodie and Aiden working together. We clear the ambushers until Jodie is attacked from behind. A one-on-one boss type of fight begins, similar to the lab fight against the Doctor in the condenser chapter. Like I aforementioned in that chapter, the fight scene is very well produced and choreographed, but because of the control design we miss most of the fight. Luckily this time Jodie had the CIA training, but nothing can prepare you for the real thing. This is what I love about Quantic Dream. Themselves and David Cage took the time to properly develop this character. She didn't obtain these combat skills overnight, they took time and showed you how she managed to obtain them, but they also didn't make her the unbreakable hero. There are many moments in this narrative where Jodie's given a chance to be human and show her vulnerabilities. They are perfectly executed and they are shown when she wants to, not when it is required, because the writers need her to. This is very similar in Naughty Dog's 2013 title, The Last of Us. A very similar trait is shown in that title. I mentioned this in my video breaking down Ellie's character across the Last of Us franchise. Link in the description if you're interested. Okay, moving on. After the ambush, it is now breaking daylight. Jodie hasn't got much time left. Jodie notices the tower and realises again that it is the location she needs to head for. Salim catches on and gets Jodie to follow him. They make their way along, whilst again seeing another one of Aiden's party tricks. Oh, too soon. We see his ability to shield Jodie and Salim crossing gunfire to get to a ladder. Little Salim is impressed again. The pair realise they are deep behind enemy lines. Jodie uses Aiden to hijack a truck as well as its driver in order to sneak them through. But as you can see, that doesn't go well. Again, there are maybe different paths you can take, but I blasted through the checkpoint because we were bound to have been seen anyway. Yet again, a really well polished chase scene plays, but we're too distracted following the arrows in order to win it. The only thing that did baffle me is how the hell did the pair manage to bail from the truck at that speed, and also without a scratch? Surely we could have seen that. Or did they bail and Aiden saved them? I think we'll never know. But it might have looked a little something like this. I know that's only a small thing, but things like that can break the immersion for me. It is here where Jodie has to part ways with Salim. Of course the language barrier is still a problem. She proceeds onto the building, she comes across it, hides up and sends Aiden in. It is here where we finally find Jamal, the warlord. We have to find a way to take him down. We can pretty much guess where this is going. We have to take over a soldier and create a massacre, in which, well, I did. Once done, we let Jodie into the compound. She finds his body and gets a photograph for evidence. Then, in a very surprising twist, I definitely didn't see it coming, and I normally have a good sense of what is coming next in media such as this. Salim arrives in the compound. Yep, the soldier we just used for the massacre was Salim's father, Jamie. He shoots at Jodie out of anger, justified I suppose, but she was just following orders. This was confusing though, because suddenly the whole area starts to find out and turns on her. These were not militia either, I think they were locals. Resistance fighters maybe? This is where I started to get anxious. Jodie tries to escape and it all goes wrong. She catches some lead in the leg and rushes to a small building, with literally hundreds surrounding her. She requests her extraction and tries to hang on till then. I was thinking here, I know she had no choice to go to the CIA, but was all this worth it? She has had literally little to no positive experiences in her life, and is going to end like this, either her taking her own life, or hundreds of people torturing her till the inevitable. Aiden steps in and heals Jodie, then finds a hatch to the roof. Jodie climbs the ladder, but is soon found by the locals and shot again. I really thought this was it. I wish I pulled the trigger rather than seeing Jodie go out like this. I thought perhaps I took the wrong path and this was the consequence. But right at the last minute, Extraction arrives, and I don't think I've ever been so pleased to see Ryan. This will probably be the only time though. Closing out the chapter, Ryan and Jodie are flying home via helicopter. Ryan is praising Jodie on her work. Of course he knew the sacrifices that had to be made in doing so, and clearly it's going to take a mental toll on her. There's a moment of silence, and Jodie decides to put the television on, in which turns on to the national news, reporting on Jamal's demise. All is revealed as to why the locals were more than upset. Jamal was everything but a warlord, but a democratically elected new president of the country. Ryan lied, clearly. Of course Jodie has this on her conscience too. Not only that, but herself and Aiden wiped out the remaining government also. Seriously, when is Jodie going to get a break? She rightfully so flips at Ryan, which again is very well performed by Elliot. This was clearly Jodie's last straw with the CIA, as she jumps from the helicopter in protest. That's one way of getting your message across. Once on the ground, she rings Nathan. Yeah, remember him? It's been a while. She explains to him all of what has gone on. Nathan tries to reassure her to come back to the DPA to talk it over. Jodie for once puts her foot down and actually threatens the agency if they attempt to pursue her. Well played, Jodie. This chapter has to be one of my favourites. It opens after the conclusion of the previous chapter. Jodie is on a train, obviously trying to get as far away as possible. We put into Aiden's perspective. I accidentally woke Jodie up, in which she was not best pleased about. Whilst playing as Aiden, we can upset other passengers on the train, which I found amusing. It clearly shows whilst Jodie is resting, Aiden gets bored it would seem. The train comes to a stop. The local sheriff department have been notified of Jodie's whereabouts. Aiden quickly tries to warn Jodie. She again announces her displeasure with being woken up, but of course she soon realises, as the officers board the train, she leaves her seat and makes her way down to the rear carriages, but is spotted by the officers and they begin to give chase, in which leads to one of the best escape sequences I've ever experienced in a video game. Jodie rushes through the carriages and realises she is nearing the end of the train, and decides to exit through a window onto the roof. As you do. Officers follow her, for who knows why, no job is worth stepping foot onto a train's roof. They are clearly not aware that Jodie is combat trained, because she single-handedly wipes all of them out, but there comes a point where she is starting to become outnumbered. These first scenes are so well produced, I felt it was like I was watching and playing a fully fledged box office film. The suspense was handled well, and the pacing is nigh on perfect. What players didn't expect, especially if you're playing the game in random order as intended, we first see the use of Aiden's shield. When I first saw Jodie jump, I thought, wait, what? No, don't do it. It was a massive surprise to me, but I wasn't expecting it. Then again, what other option did she have? But Aiden's shield worked. She safely manages to leap from the train. Now this is where I'm a little miffed. Let's say the train was travelling at 50-60 miles per hour. I don't know how fast modern commercial trains travel at, but they've been travelling away from that train station where the officers first spotted Jodie. So there may be a mile or two away from that location by now. They would have intended to spot and detain her at that station. So when she landed in the woods, she's pretty much in the middle of nowhere, but somehow the sheriff's department catch up to her, unless they had a search radius. I always thought sheriff departments only consisted of a few officers. Maybe I'm wrong, I have no idea how the United States law enforcement is run, because as you can guess by my accent, I'm not from there. I did find this a little too convenient though, but I'm willing to let it off slightly, due to how damn well this chapter is set up, and the production value is mind-boggling. Jodie runs into the woods in order to flee from the officers as well as their dogs. She manages to find some rocks and climb up them. Again, her training is coming in handy here. I loved again that the Welcome to the CIA chapter wasn't just a filler chapter in a way. It actually introduced you to mechanics that you'll be using later on, and this is another example. She manages to lose their trail by hiding against the rocks. Once climbing to the top, there is a roadblock ahead. She sends Aiden ahead to see if there is a way to cross. She spots a motorcycle. Now again, if you had been playing the game as intended, this is the first time we see Aiden take control of someone, and it is freaky at first. Aiden uses the officer to cause a distraction, whilst Jodie can escape with his bike. This, in my opinion, actually caused her to get spotted more easily. Personally, I would have stuck to the shadows and continued on foot in the woods. The officers pursuing her had lost her trail, so she would have gotten away with it. But by being on the bike on an open road, she is spotted by the police helicopter. Through all this though, I was thinking how mad this all is, just to track down one girl, and it's about to get madder. But seriously, why can't the CIA just let her be free? Is it because she's considered a danger to the public? But that can't be the case, as they allowed her to have her own apartment on her own. It's probably more down to the fact that she has ammo on the CIA to spill their secrets. A whistleblower, so to speak. That's my guess. They want to silence her before she spills any details on exposing higher-ups in the agency. Jodie again comes across a roadblock, but this time it's the big dogs, a SWAT team. Jodie has no choice but to charge at them. Luckily, she can use Aiden's shielding ability again, and it gets her through no problem. She finds herself riding into a small town, but gets ambushed by the same SWAT team. Now completely cornered, Jodie has no choice but to take down every single SWAT team officer. I know I've mentioned before in early chapters about Jodie being a potential risk to the public, and she showed how much power she actually wields, but it is here in this scene we truly see what she can do when provoked, and being left with no choice. She just causes utter chaos. We've never seen Jodie or Aiden cause this much damage before. Is she considered dangerous now? Well, technically yes, but would she do this to an innocent bystander, a member of the public? No, I definitely think not. It's only because she is threatened or literally has no choice. In my opinion, even though those officers probably had families of their own, her actions were justified, as it was technically self-defense. These ambushes were completely unprovoked. She didn't harm anyone. All she technically did was unofficially resign from the agency by leaping from the helicopter. Yes, she did leave a stark message, but it's a fair one. I thoroughly loved this chapter. Yes, there was the inconsistency of the officers finding her right after leaping out from the train, and her escape methods via using the motorcycle wasn't the best plan in the world. I think I also would have liked to have seen Ryan back at the agency, at least trying to do something in order to protect Jodie, but overall the chapter works and flows very well. Now this is my favourite chapter hands down, even though it is the heaviest, and by heaviest I mean emotional, but there are essences of light if you look for it, and this is why I love this chapter. It is now a few weeks since Jodie decided to defect from the agency. With nowhere else to turn, she is now on the streets, hence the chapter title. The chapter starts with Jodie getting up from a shop doorway, approaches a payphone and calls Nathan. Love how when Jodie pushes the buttons, they actually actuate. I love that small detail. It's something games have struggled with throughout the years. Anyway, I digress. I'm just being nerdy again. Nathan answers the phone. Jodie says to Nathan that, quote, they're back, in which I presume are the entities that harassed her throughout her childhood. It is clear Jodie has hit rock bottom. She's completely broken. A lifetime of being tied to Aiden is clearly taking a toll. Nathan is pleading with her to tell him where she is, so he can pick her up, but Jodie just hangs up and leaves the phone. Whilst walking away, she collapses, and we're put into Aiden's perspective. We see the entities all around her. Again, we don't actually know how or why this happens. I think they're getting through Aiden via the infraworld, in which I briefly explained earlier, and I assume they drain her energy, or they prevent her from sleeping, like what happened when she was a child. Aiden pushes them away and grabs the attention of Detective Perkins. wrong game. Again, sorry. She draws the attention of Stan, a fellow homeless person. He comes to Jodie's rescue and takes her back to the place he calls home. Then there is a strange sequence of Jodie in a burning building. A strange dream perhaps? Well, maybe. She then awakes a few days later. Stan welcomes her to his place. Stan is very hospitable and offers her a drink. I already knew Stan would be a good character. I don't know why, but he just seemed like a decent man. Stan goes on to ask how long Jodie has been on the streets for. It appears Jodie has now been on the run for a few weeks. Stan has been out here for 3 years. Throughout his dialogue exchange, we're given options to respond with the truth, or to lie, or dismiss altogether. I thought I should be truthful to Stan, up to a point, because he was good enough to take Jodie in. I did obviously hold back on telling him the truth as to why she was on the run, as he might not believe her story. He might even think she is mad or under the influence of something. I will let this scene play, as it's much better to hear it from the characters themselves.
Hey. I was beginning to think you'd never wake up.
Where am I?
You're in my place, kid. Not very luxurious, but quiet. Finding the streets a few days ago. You're in pretty bad shape.
You've been taking care of me?
Ah, come on, somebody had to. I couldn't leave you lying there, dying like a dog in the street. My name's Stan. What's your name?
Jodie.
Welcome back to the land of living, Jodie. Nice to have some company every once in a while. Some coffee? Strong. Tastes like shit, but hold you up against the cold. Careful, it's hot. How long you been on the streets, kid?
A few weeks? Something like that.
Be about 3 years for me. I don't know how many times I thought I was gonna snuff it. Just go completely nuts. But I guess you can get used to anything. Even live with nothing. You want to run? Parents? Crazy boyfriend, something like that?
My boyfriend he was gonna kill me. So I just had to get away.
You made the right choice. Well, it's better be on the street than let some guy treat you like his property. You got someplace to go? Family? Friends? Somebody missing you?
No. Yeah, I guess there is someone, but I don't want to see him now. Not like this.
You can stay here if you like. I ain't got much to share, but whatever I got's yours.
Thanks.
Again, my assumption of Stan was correct. He is just genuinely a nice and caring person. In that clip, he goes on to introduce the other occupants of the area. We then see Jodie mention to Stan that she wishes she was never saved, which really hit me. I wasn't expecting that, but at the same time, I wasn't surprised. The game did a great job with getting us invested in Jodie, and if you're invested enough, you come to empathise with her. We walk in her shoes with her. All the way through her life so far, we've seen nothing but Jodie experience bad and or sad experiences. We were so desperately trying to see her have one essence of happiness, that maybe the player is also thinking maybe she would be at peace if she were to be left. It brings the game down to a grounded level, and it really hits home, at least for me. It proves David Cage knows exactly what he's doing. Once walking away, we pass a knife in a tyre. We're given a choice, to continue or not. I'm trying to self-censor here to keep YouTube happy, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, I felt this sadness for Jodie, and some sort of devastation. I wanted her to be able to rise up from all this. I decided to continue, because in life, things that go up like hills must go down, but at the same time, what goes down will come up. I know it's a strange analogy, but events in life are only temporary, and the next day can always be better. Remember folks, if you're struggling, talk to someone. Anyone. It could be a step to getting back up that hill. I decided to take Jodie outside to gather her thoughts and get some air. I should have spoken to the other residents, but it doesn't affect the narrative as we converse with them later. Stan knows she is obviously struggling and offers Jodie to see how things work in their daily routine. They're low on food, so Stan takes her to his usual spot in hopes they can make some money. They need a minimum of $5 to get enough for everyone. They both take a seat. Jodie asks how long does it usually take to get that much. Stan gives Jodie an answer she was not looking for. It varies from a few hours to a whole week. Jodie decides to try and go on her own to see if she has any success. It does make sense really for them to separate. Jodie crosses the road. I remember to look both ways. She goes to enter a supermarket but is sent away by security outside. We can explore this whole high street by the way, and again we can take different paths. I approached the newspaper dispensers and got Iden to get some coins out of there for us. I then tried the cafe in which I was shooed away by the owner. We continue further on down the street and a man by a building says he can do us a favour if we do him one. Think you catch his drift. Thankfully, I was given the option to make Jodie refuse, and she gives a great refusal line too.
What do I have to do?
I figure I'll do you a favor. You do me a favor. $10 says you come around the back with me.
I'm not that desperate, asshole. You can take your $10 and stick it.
A little further down, we come across another homeless fellow with a guitar. Jodie asks if she can play it for a while. Of course we know Jodie can play, after the scene where she gave Cole tinnitus after her solo, back in the Like Other Girls chapter. Jodie sits and plays well into the night, and soon enough makes enough money to feed the homeless crew. She gives half her takings to the owner of the guitar. She then returns to Stan. He is amazed by the amount of money she's managed to raise. He heads across the road to the supermarket to get some supplies. Upon his return, a bunch of thugs approach Stan and begin to set about him. Jodie notices and steps in, asking them to leave if they don't want to get hurt. We know Jodie can fight, but these Muppets don't know what hit them. Their leader goes on to insult Jodie and takes a swing at her. Of course, another quick time follow the arrow event starts, and she literally decks all of them, as expected.
Back off and you won't get hurt.
Looky here. Looks like Bum's got a girlfriend. Rolling Ed, let's demonstrate how we deal with skanky, low-life bitches. See you later, bitch.
I'm out of here!
How did you do that?
I learned how to fight in the army.
Yeah, but there was 4 of them. Just one of you?
4 assholes. I did not know how to fight. Let's get out of here before they come back.
All right.
They flee, and Stan is quite shocked as to what he just saw. He is eternally grateful for Jodie saving him. They head back home. We then join Jodie, unfortunately, contemplating taking her life again. However, she does decide to step back and join the others inside for dinner. In this scene, we get to know the people we are staying with properly. We can choose who we talk to and ask some questions. The scene first starts off with Walter asking what happened to Stan. He brushes it off, but applauds Jodie on her efforts to save him. Jodie then went on to talk to Tuesday about her baby, then Walter. We start to develop these characters a little more, seeing that they were just normal people who were living normal lives. It actually opens your eyes to the reality of homelessness. Jodie asks Stan if he knew the attackers. I maybe should have asked this first, as this is what the conversation started with. Turns out the thugs literally pick on the homeless for a fight for no reason, and then film it, in which I assume they then put online. Walter pipes up and states they attacked him too, and he is still yet to recover. I'm guessing from the emotional shock. The game does a great job of opening your eyes, like I have mentioned, to what people on the streets have to go through. It does a great job of making it grounded in its setting. We see the human side to it, their side. It shows that these characters know things could be better, but they're grateful for what they have. And I think a lot of us take that for granted these days. Anyway, Tuesday decides to ask about Jodie for a change, as to be fair, like she says, they practically know nothing about her. Jodie goes on to pretty much tell the truth, while not giving everything away. Walter asks why she is different, in what way. I decided to be truthful, as these people had told us their stories. I felt Jodie should feel comfortable in doing the same. After all, they were good enough to take her in and accept her. Well, we mostly have Stan to thank for it, but you get what I'm saying. She goes on to tell her story about Aiden being with her since birth. Of course, the group immediately thinks she has an addiction problem, like Jimmy. Jodie decides to prove to them that she is truly different. Now, I haven't tried every path in this scene, but when you first start this chapter and awaken Stan's area, you can see a photo of a woman near the bed, in which we assume is his wife or partner. So I assumed she might be deceased. So I knew what was going to happen here, so I went with Stan. Like I say, I don't know what happens if you approach other characters. Maybe let me know in the comments what happens in the other paths, and let me know why you chose them. Jodie takes his hands and does the mind-reading flashback ability that Aiden has, except this time she can allow the deceased on the other side the ability to speak. It's oddly strange, but intriguing.
Jodie, you all right?
Stan, my love.
Oh, Jodie, stop that. That's not funny.
It's been a long time, Stan. 4 long years.
Nancy. Nancy, can't be you.
It is me, my love. I never left. I've been here beside you all this time.
My God.
Breaks my heart to see you so lost, so desperate.
It's hard, Nancy. So hard. I'm empty without you, my love. I'm so empty.
Stop living in the past, Stan. Nothing's gonna change what we had together. But now you have to start a new life. Go back to work. Fall in love. Just be happy again. For me, Stan. Do it for me.
Oh, I miss you. God help me, I miss you.
miracle.
Jody?
Thanks.
At first it confuses and even scares Stan, as it would anyone else, being able to talk to someone who has since passed. In a way it gave Stan closure to his grief. Of course you can never get over losing someone close to you, but he has the peace of mind that she will always be close. It might actually help him in getting out of the situation he is in. The others now realise Jody was speaking the truth, with Walter claiming it's a miracle. Stan thanks her and Jody lays down to rest. A few hours later she is awoken by screaming. It is Tuesday, her waters have broken. Everyone is panicking, rightfully so, as they're under-equipped for this. The baby is clearly coming early, so they've had no time to prepare. Stan acts quickly and asks Jimmy to scout out a nearby abandoned building for them to move into. He asks Walter to stay with Tuesday, while Stan and Jody go out to get some supplies. Whilst on the way to the supermarket, Jody expresses her concern for the future plans. What are they actually going to do? Stan is determined to at least give it a try. He doesn't want the child to be raised under that bridge. I do admire Stan's determination. Even though he has hit rock bottom and been there for a number of years now, it hasn't changed or completely broken him. He felt this was his chance to get something right. They approach the supermarket to find it closed. Stan starts to panic. Jody reassures him to leave it to her. We jump to Aiden's perspective and manage to get the supermarket opened up and disarmed, allowing them to get the supplies they need. Jimmy heads back to find them. He managed to make it into the building, and Walter and Tuesday are already there. Once in the building, luckily we are not too late, but it was close. Tuesday asks everyone to leave except Jody, which obviously makes sense, being the only other female in the group. The others leave and it's down to Jody to be the midwife. Rather her than me, I tell you that. But it's a learning curve for them both. Talk about being thrown in at the deep end. I did chuckle at Jody's comments trying to calm Tuesday down. If you can hear in her voice, she is also completely out of her depth. She's just as terrified. That line was well delivered by Elliot. Jody starts to get things prepared, turning on an electric halogen heater and getting some surgical instruments ready. Well, I say that, more like scissors. Better than nothing, I guess. Then, well, the usual baby deliverance scene plays that we've seen hundreds of times across many different forms of media. Jody does a great job of reassuring her, but equally the scene was played very well by both actors. They keep you in that frame of mind that they have no idea what they're doing, but they are trying their damnedest. Then finally, the baby is born. A girl. Jody lets the others in, and for once, throughout this ever-spiralling narrative, we get an essence of light, a nice moment for the group to celebrate, this thing called life. Tuesday names her girl Zoe, and thanks Jody for her helping. Stan stands up and praises Jody, calling her a miracle. Their miracle. Those words really hit me. Again, I said that Stan is a genuine person. He is also one of those brilliantly written side characters that easily could be passed off as a main one. This one moment though is conveying to Jody that she made the right choice. To keep on living, this was the moment that she realised there is more to be seen. There are still good and caring people out there like Stan and his group. This small moment can be missed if you weren't paying attention. As they say, the smallest actions often speak the loudest. The scene fades out. The next scene fades in, to Jody being awoken to some loud sounds. Once she sits up, the whole building is ablaze. Straight away, I thought this was my fault. I felt sick. I thought this was because I turned on the halogen heater, and maybe it had a dodgy electrical fault or connection, and it's caused this fire. I hoped I hadn't caused any fatalities. I thought I perhaps chose the wrong path, and this was the repercussions from it. This is what Jody was seeing when she collapsed in the street. Some sort of premonition. So can Jody predict the future? Well, maybe. She should make a film about the premonitions she's been having. It might make a good horror film franchise, spanning 5 films. It's just a thought, so Anyway, Jodie tries to navigate the burning building. She finds Stan, wakes him up, and asks him where the others are. She orders Stan out of the building, and we try to locate the others. Finding Walter was easy, as he was on the same floor. Finding and saving Jimmy, on the other hand, was a bit more tricky. He is at a bit of an impasse. There is a hole in the floor that he can't quite jump to make, or so he says. Being in shock doesn't help. Jodie has to think quickly, otherwise he will die along with Tuesday and Zoe. Aiden steps in and takes over Jimmy, and jumps over the gap to safety. This allows us to focus on Tuesday and Zoe now. With the building falling apart, Jodie has little time. The game does a great job with the tension in this scene. Jodie slowly has to go outside the building via a ledge to get to them. I remember spamming the buttons as hard as I could, because remember, I thought I caused this mess, so I personally felt responsible to get everyone out in one piece. And luckily, Jodie manages that. By using Aiden again, we walk through the fires with Aiden's shield. We manage to get to the stairs and send Tuesday down first, and it's a good job we did. Some rubble falls down, trapping Jodie on the upper floor. She manages to find a window and leaps out of it. We obviously didn't need any suspense as to whether Jodie will survive this fall or not, because we know she can. I mean, she dived out of a helicopter, for crying out loud. Once landed, the group rush in and are outstanded as to how she managed to do that. I think they were more probably referring to the rescue effort rather than the impressive landing. Or maybe both. Who knows? I don't think it really matters. Moving on. Jodie immediately asks how Zoe is. A grateful Tuesday says she's fine. Walter asks what I've been dreading from the start of the scene. How did the fire start? Then it all comes clear. It wasn't the prodigy. Okay, sorry, another crap joke. Then it all comes clear. It wasn't my decision. Out of nowhere, a baseball bat strikes Stan and Jodie. It was the group of thugs, not me. So this scene was linear. Thank goodness. One of the thugs is armed with a firearm, so the group is powerless. The leader strikes Jodie again, and they leave. The camera pans to Jodie bleeding from the head, even though she wasn't struck on the head. This didn't really tally up. Maybe she hit her head on the floor? I don't think this would result in her death, would it? Surely not. But I guess we're all built differently. But Stan confirms Jodie is not breathing. This is it for Jodie Holmes. Her story, her pain, is finally over. And the credits begin to roll. You didn't think I was done there, did you? There's more. Of course, there's more. We 3 hours in at this point? Probably. The next scene of this chapter shows Jodie somewhere between life and the infraworld. I believe it's something similar to Death Stranding. When Sam was killed, he entered an area called the Seam, or sometimes his own beach. These areas were between life and death, and in some cases you could self-revive yourself. I think this is what we're seeing here, maybe. We see most of her memories we've experienced so far, then asks if she's dead. The television screen appears from the darkness, and we see a clip of a woman giving birth to a child, in which I assume this is Jodie's biological mum. The doctors take her away, and her mum is clearly distressed. Jodie questions if that was her mum. We're then shown another scene of Jodie, looking like something out of Mass Effect. Maybe another glimpse into the future? It is clear she is trapped in the infraworld with Aiden. She goes to approach him, but he sends her back to her body. Jodie wakes up in a hospital bed with no hair and a very bad scar to the head. Was she perhaps in a coma? I was slightly puzzled as to why Jodie didn't want to come back. I was hoping she'd come to the back of all that after the birth of Zoe. But then again, even though she helped bring life into the world, it doesn't fix the issues of trying to escape the CIA and coping to live with Aiden and having no family left. She gets up and explores her room and investigates what she's missed. Turns out she has been in a coma. We see that Stan has a full-time job and housing now. The thugs got caught the same night. It was stupid of them filming the crimes they committed, but I'm glad they got caught. Jimmy visited her, also while leaving a photo of the whole group. And Tuesday visited her too. She's starting to use her real name again, in which is Eliza. See, again, this is a small moment of light. Jodie left such an impact on these people in such a small amount of time. She has completely changed their lives. I know her situation hasn't improved, but she can surely hold on to that. She goes to leave her hospital room. The camera pans round to a reception desk, with a doctor explaining to two suits that she's been in a coma for several months. Of course, they're CIA. But why would they bother speaking to her though? He said she's in a coma. Jodie has to think fast and leaps out the window. The next scene is where we finally, after all these hours, we link in with the prologue. This is why the game starts with Jodie saying she's trying to remember. This is also why David Cage wants the players to play the game as designed, because you are remembering with her. The whole narrative is taking place after this incident in her mind, and there finally ends this near perfect chapter, and arguably the most poignant. I'm going to get this out of the way right on the outset. This is my least favourite chapter, full stop. Not at this moment in the narrative, but the whole narrative. This chapter is literally just an hour of filler. Perhaps it was down to the way I played the chapter. Maybe I should have explored it more. But to me, it adds nothing to the narrative or to develop Jodie's character. It also does nothing to help with the mixed pacing so far. I will run through the chapter and show why for me it didn't work. To me, it could have been cut from the game completely. But with that, let's begin. Jodie is still running from the agency. It must be a few months since she escaped the hospital, as her hair is starting to grow back. She's walking along a desert road, whilst clearly being exhausted and dehydrated. She tries to catch a lift, but no such luck. She sits down and realises the situation she is in, and tries not to panic. Aiden tries to get her attention, but she is dismissive. She looks behind her and finds a ranch. Funny thing is, we can see this on the right as we're approaching the rock. How come she never saw it? Maybe we've got a wider field of view. Jodie heads to the front door whilst reassuring Aiden. He's nervous apparently. Not that like he has to do the greeting or anything. He doesn't really say a lot, does he? Someone answers the door. Jodie apologises and explains her predicament, but is told she cannot stay there. Jodie persists and says it will only be for the night. She is about to be shut out until another resident of the house says she can stay. We're then allowed into the house and we're offered to sit for dinner with the residents. They're a family of Native Americans. The gentleman who allowed us to stay is the ranch owner, Paul. He has been here his whole life and resides here with his sons, Corey and Jay, and his mum, in which I won't attempt to pronounce her name. Apparently she hasn't spoken in years. They all sit down and eat, and it's quiet for an awkwardly long amount of time, till Paul starts small talk and asks where Jodie is going. I decided to be sincere, as he was good enough to take us in. Jodie starts asking her own questions about the ranch. It's nothing really that adds to the chapter, it's just some tiny filler content with some small character development, but it's more to pass time till the storm rolls in. As soon as the storm rolls in, all the characters apart from the mum get up from the table very quickly and act very cagey and start to barricade the windows. I know deserts get dust storms, but can they really be that bad? Then I worked it all out before the game had the chance to tell me. It was too predictable, and to be honest, given the nature of this game, it is easy to work out. I don't know a lot about Native American culture, but I know spirits and entities are things they believe in. Again, at least I think so. So correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But going off of this theory, I knew this was some sort of entity looking for something that the family had. That it wanted something along those lines. And the fact that the family were acting coy, boarding up all the windows and telling Jodie to stay inside, all but confirmed it to me. And it was going to have to be Jodie and Aiden to save the day. I was very disappointed that I found this chapter so predictable. When I played up to this point, I loved that I didn't really know what was going to happen in each chapter. I was always wondering how the end of the game was going to turn out after my choices. This is what I love so much about Detroit Become Human. I was always guessing. Not once did I predict the outcome of any of these chapters in that title. Once Jodie is in her room, my prediction is backed up again by her seeing figures in her room and hearing strange sounds coming from the outside. She also wakes up from another premonition and/or nightmare. We can also leave the room and investigate the sounds, but if I'm honest, I couldn't be bothered, and nor could Jodie, and she sleeps through to the morning. After all, we're only here for one night, so why bother? The next morning, Jodie is ready to leave, and thanks Paul. He stops Jodie and offers her to stay and work on the farm. He won't be able to pay her, but he offers her to stay, in which for some reason, Jodie agrees. Even after what went on last night, none of them said anything as to what was going on. As we change into the work clothes, we join Paul outside, and we see Paul analysing a dead sheep with a large wound on its torso. Yes, it could have been wolves maybe, but being what Jodie is used to, surely she would think this is related to what happened last night. She doesn't question it at first and does the tasks that Paul asks. Then suddenly, it's lunchtime. That day went quick. Or maybe Jodie got up late. She sits down with Corey and Jay and begins to ask questions subtly. She asks about the ranch being so isolated. Turns out a lot of the inhabitants of the surrounding areas left, and they're all what's left. She then asks about the noise overnight. She also finally asks about the sheep. Jay plays it down and says it's just the usual desert storm. He starts to get defensive, telling Jodie she asks too many questions, so he decides to ask some himself. His reaction does nothing but to prove to Jodie something dangerous is going on. Silly boy. Both the boys get back to work. Jodie goes off to see what else needs doing around the ranch. Jodie approaches Jay and helps in getting a stubborn horse into the stable. Of course she cheats and uses Aiden to get him into the stable. Smart move I suppose. Up to this point the pacing isn't too bad. Again, even though I think it is pointless she stayed. But nonetheless, the pacing is fine here. It's what comes next is where it slows down to a literal snail's pace. After getting the horse in the stable, Jodie goes to the outside shower. Whilst in there, a figure appears, then disappears, and leaves some writing on the wall, Crown, in which will be seen again later on. The scene closes, and the next one opens to all the characters finishing up dinner. Then the storm starts, and all the family begin to act cagey again. Paul asks Jodie to go to her room again, but she persists and asks what is going on. She has no luck again, and decides to sneak out to see what is really going on. After some hiding behind a rock, she soon sees what's going on. Again, as I predicted, it's an entity, and how coincidental that Jodie can be used as the entity exorcist. The figures she has been seeing appear, and seem to be trying to fend off the entity, again in which will come clear later. The entity spots Jodie and attacks. Aiden tries to help, but it is the figures what actually protect Jodie and fend off the entity. Don't get me wrong, I love the set piece, but again, this whole chapter just feels so out of place with the rest of the narrative. The entity, along with the figures, disappear. The family run out, and clearly they are worried for Jodie. But if they told the truth in the first place, she wouldn't have left the house. Paul does finally own up though, as to why the spirit is here. It simply wants blood, but obviously there has to be more to it than that. And that is going to be Jodie's job. She's going to go out of her way to solve this mystery. The next morning, Jodie heads out with Jay to check on some more sheep that are kept just outside the ranch's grounds. It is on this trip we see how truly isolated the ranch is. Once arriving, the pair sit down and Jodie begins to ask Jay that she needs to know exactly what happened the previous night. I knew this scene might try and put these two characters together, but for me, it would feel forced, and like I aforementioned, none of these characters in this chapter are very well developed. She goes on to ask questions anyway, starting off with the spirit. Jay starts to give some answers. Apparently this spirit turns up night after night, claiming souls. She then goes on to ask as to why they never left. Paul Paul just sees the spirit as a part of the land, part of the life there. A bit silly if you ask me, sacrificing your whole family just for tradition. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Jay decides to throw some questions Jodie's way, and because he was never truthful, and always seemed to have an attitude in my opinion, I decided to throw it back at him, and make Jodie evade every question. Paul interrupts on the walkie-talkie at the right moment, and informs Jade there is no water at the ranch, indicating that something is wrong with the well. Jodie offers to go out alone to investigate. It is here where the pacing plummets. The pacing hadn't been brilliant, but it was okay. I've glossed over a lot of dialogue and segments here. Once freeing the windmill, allowing the water pump to operate again, Jodie does some exploring. She finds a shack and goes inside. It is full of tribal charms and trinkets. On the way out, she sees a vision of past times, I assume. This is leading up to how and why this entity exists, and how Jodie is going to stop it. This vision she is seeing is being shown to her by these figures she keeps seeing. I'm guessing they are connecting through Iden in order to show her this. They are showing her the way. One of them leads her to her next hint, an abandoned fort up the road a ways. Once there, she does some more searching, with Iden on hand this time. The flashbacks show this entity has been around right back to the days of the Civil War and beyond that. It turns out that basically that the figures we had been seeing were tribe members who accidentally let the entity out in hopes of driving the soldiers off their land, but the plan backfired and the entity murdered all of them. Jodie must now go back to the forked tree where it was summoned and work out a way to stop it. When she arrives, she takes note of the symbol drawn on the ground. It is also your job as the player to remember this too. Luckily I did, because I was nearly asleep at this point. Probably like you are, viewer. I did say this was going to be a long critique. I'm really going for that 10-minute mark on this one. Jodie analyses the summoning location and realises out of the 5 graves Iden located, only 4 have a pendant. Jodie realises this must hold the key to getting rid of this entity. They can repeat the ritual and get it gone. The 5th pendant was carted off with a baby. Jodie takes note of all of this information and heads back to the ranch to inform Paul, but the storm is already here. Jodie rushes back to the ranch to find Paul has been attacked by the entity. Corey and Jay flee to the house and take Paul inside. Jodie follows, then speaks to Paul's mother, as she notices the blanket that is draped over her. Turns out it has been in the family for many years, and yes, she is speaking to Jodie after years of silence. Oh, and yeah, she has the last pendant Jodie was looking for, as we guessed. Paul's mother and Jodie surmise a plan to take down this entity and send it back to where it belongs. Paul's mother remembers the ritual, and Jodie draws out the symbol that we had to memorise earlier. It does keep you on your toes in that aspect. Would be interesting to see what would happen if we chose the wrong symbol though. We then place down all the pendants and have a soul stand over them. Everyone participates apart from Paul, because, well, he did. So we use Iden instead. Of course the entity doesn't go down without a fight. Iden aids the tribal spirit members in pushing it back into the other realm, and with that, the ranch is free. But there were some casualties. Paul's mother also copped it, and the scene closes there. We're next brought to a burial site by Jay. We say goodbye to the ones we lost. Jodie does see another one of the tribals before leaving. We're given an option to stay and investigate, or to leave. But if I'm honest, I was done by this point, so I left. It is then time to say goodbye to the brothers. Jay asks if she is leaving. Jodie says she has to in order to work out things from her past, like returning to the agency. I mean, she could stay at the ranch, but I don't get why she would either. She still hardly knows Jay or Corey really. 2 days, maybe 3 tops. Jay thanks Jodie for her efforts and says she's always welcome to come back to the ranch. She then says goodbye to Corey and goes back to Jay to say goodbye. We're then given an option to hug or kiss. I went with hug, because why would you kiss him? Again, this character has hardly been developed. He had a lot of attitude towards Jodie through most of the chapter. I didn't see anything developing between these two characters. It made no sense to me at all. Maybe with different paths, developments are made, but again I just can't see it. Corey comes into the shop with an old motorcycle that was Paul's. They both fixed it up and give it to Jodie, in which was very generous. Jodie starts the bike and leaves the ranch, with all the characters watching her leave, and that ends the chapter. Finally. This chapter opens a few good years after Navajo, judging by the length of Jodie's hair. After an hour or so stuck in the desert, it's great to be back into the main narrative. It's not until you get into this chapter you realise how disjointed that last chapter was from the narrative. She meets up with Cole in a quiet park. Yeah, remember Cole? He's finally back, and judging by his reaction to Jodie, I'm guessing he hasn't seen her since she was carted off to the agency all those years back, and I'm also assuming Jodie is still on the run from them, hence this low-key meeting. They start walking together, and Jodie goes on to explain she had to defect. She goes on to ask how Nathan is getting on. Turns out he's doing well for himself. He's got a promotion. He's running the DPA from top to bottom. Cole is still working on research on different entities. It's good that the game fills in the blanks, as there has been a lot of time jumps, so we did need to be filled in. The great thing is about all of these lines of dialogue is that not only is it to fill us in, but some of it is important to what will occur in later chapters, and almost foreshadows what will happen in them. Jodie goes on to ask if any more progress has been done in the infraworld. Cole explains that the DPA have spent millions on development on a new condenser that apparently is the most powerful ever created. Now remember what Jodie asked Nathan to do all those years back in the chapter Condenser.
Don't let them ever do that again. If they open a passage, there'll be nothing left.
So Nathan is the head of the DPA. He's gone behind Jodie's back and approved or backed this development. Surely he would have trusted Jodie's judgment all those years back. Maybe it was out of his hands, but if he's in a position of power, now he could surely oppose it. Now for the part they're both actually here for. Jodie contacted Cole to find out some information on Jodie's biological mother, the woman whom we saw in her coma/death in Homeless. The information Cole managed to collect is limited. The day Jodie was born, Norah gave birth at a DPA hospital, but the child was declared stillborn. This might possibly explain Jodie's condition. Jodie asks about her biological father, but unfortunately he passed before her birth. What he does know is that Norah took part in experiments 20 plus years ago, similar to what Jodie took part in, hinting that she has the same gift as Jodie, and perhaps it has been passed on to her. The game, similar to the beginning chapters, does a great job of laying out clues for the player to keep guessing, but doesn't give enough for you to work it out. David is still playing it cautiously here. Jodie is ultimately here because she wants to see her mum, and unfortunately it's bad news again. When is Jodie actually going to get some good news for a change? She has been sectioned to a psychiatric hospital not long after she gave birth, and she is still there to this day. Rightfully so, Jodie is agitated by this news. No one wants to hear that their mum has been kept at a place like that for 24 years. Jodie says she's going to find her. Cole tries to reason with her, because of where her mum is, she might not get the answers she is looking for. I get what Cole is saying, he's only trying to look out for her, but it would appear that Jodie isn't really looking for answers, she just wants to see her mum. And who can really stand in her way for wanting her to do that? Cole understands, but tries to make Jodie understand that this is a high security hospital, and Jodie is still wanted for treason. Jodie is still rightfully determined to see her. She thanks Cole for taking the risk, and she heads off to find her mum. Till Cole pulls a Joel.
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
I just hope they won't change the character. Then again, that would be false advertising. Wouldn't it, Naughty Dog? This was incredibly brave of Cole to help Jodie, as this would land him in serious trouble. Remember too, Jodie was just a part of his job at the end of the day. It shows he has developed a lot of care over Jodie. He treats her like his own, as Nathan did. To a certain extent. I still can't believe he let her into that condenser. Anyway, you get my point. I got no gripes with this scene at all. It's very well done, showing all the characters' emotions and what lengths these two characters will go for one another. In the next scene they arrive at the hospital, and as Cole says, it does seem quiet with no guards etc. Cole leads the way and heads to the main entrance. He tells Jodie to try the polite approach to the receptionist. She approaches him and does exactly that. Unfortunately, he takes the Jobsworth approach and asks to see her ID, in which she hasn't got any. Who would have guessed? She finds another way and uses Aiden to determine her mum's location. Once exiting the lift, a security guard is on duty and, well, guarding the door to this floor. Jodie has to use Aiden again to distract the guard in order for them to advance. So far this chapter is extremely well paced. 7 minutes in and we're already halfway into the chapter. Now the other impasse they come across could have been cut from the game, but it takes seconds and it also complements the level design, allowing us to use Aiden again when needed. It mixes up the gameplay to play as both characters, rather than Jodie all of the time. Aiden gets the attention of the carer, so he can take him over in order to unlock the door. Cole and Jodie are stuck behind. I did appreciate that David Cage actually took the time to think about Aiden as a character too, and how he adapts to Jodie's actions. For example, he keeps to the low-key nature of this chapter. He incapacitates the carer after unlocking the door, rather than killing him. Back in Somalia, in the chapter The Mission, he actually kills people on Jodie's command. But he is more in tune with Jodie in this chapter. Maybe Aiden isn't as unhinged as we thought. Once through the doors, we enter the wing that Jodie's mum is on. We just have to find the right door. Once finding the right door, the musical score really builds up the atmosphere. Jodie's about to head into the unknown. Cole does warn her again for the final time. But again, who is anyone to try and stop her? Jodie enters the room and sees her mum sitting there, lifeless, hooked up to some medical equipment. Jodie tries talking to her to get her attention, but nothing. It's quite heartbreaking for Jodie really. The game does an excellent job with the atmosphere again too. Like I say throughout this chapter, and just before entering the room, the musical score did a great job of setting the stage. However, once we enter the room, there is nothing, just the beeps of the machine. This is how you set up an emotional scene. There is no cliché, sad violin or distant piano tune. It is just Jodie letting her emotions out and the beeping of the machine. Really well executed. It wasn't until this second playthrough I really noticed it. I really felt for Jodie. She came all this way, took all these risks to find her mum in some sort of trance, for the lack of a better word. Some sort of medically induced coma. I felt just as broken as Jodie was, after all those years of not knowing who her parents were, after all the bad experiences in this thing called life. She can't even have a conversation with her own mother. Then she must have realised. She calls on Aiden for help. We do the mind reading ability and jump into Norah's mind, in which we get small glimpses of her past, which slowly meshes in with the gaps that had previously been left in earlier chapters. We see that Norah was gifted too, and did the same experiments as Jodie, and when she gave birth to Jodie, she was taken away from her, and it was also made apparently clear to Jodie's foster parents that she may develop some, quote, special abilities. And with knowing that, shows that, to be honest, they never gave her a chance. They never really cared about her that much. When you have a child, you're meant to be there for that child and work through it, whether it is your biological child or not. Getting back on track though, it would appear after the DPA got what they wanted out of Norah, research, they put her into some sort of stasis against her will. Looks like Nathan has some explaining to do. Because come to think about it, we're given the impression when Jodie is brought to the DPA, the family hadn't been there before, but her foster parents definitely took on Jodie at the DPA hospital, which means Nathan would have been working there then, and must have known her foster parents and Norah. So he must have known about all this but kept it from Jodie. Reluctantly, Jodie goes to leave until Aiden grabs her attention. He takes Jodie and puts her into Norah's mind, or somewhere between life and the infraworld. We clear whatever is covering Norah, maybe the drugs that were silencing her, and finally Jodie can speak to her mum, but only in spirit. It was gutting to see that she couldn't hug her, but at least she can speak to her. Jodie asks what happened to her, and my analogy was sort of right. The drugs she was given have trapped her mind in this place, not allowing her to do anything, basically like a coma, and it is not reversible. This was probably Jodie's most heart-wrenching experience yet, but at least she did get to speak to her mum after 20 odd years of wondering. All this was possible thanks to Aiden. Back in the room now, Jodie takes her mum's locket, and we're given the option no offspring wants to decide whether to end her mum's suffering or not. Myself and 72% of other players on Steam decided to end Norah's suffering. I felt it was the right thing to do, and I know if we didn't, I don't think Jodie would have sat well with her leaving her like that. Exiting the room, now you can guess who's on the other side. Yep, the agency. I'm guessing the receptionist dobbed in Jodie and Cole, or maybe they tracked Cole's mobile phone. Either way, I knew this was coming, because I mentioned earlier about Nathan is going to have some explaining to do, and I knew we would end up seeing him if we were to be sent back to the agency. We can then confront him. I wouldn't say it was predictable, but I knew something was going to happen. The next scene opens with Jodie waking up in a very fancy office. She finds the main entrance door unlocked and leaves the office. She is back at the DPA. On the right is a window. She looks out of it to find what can only be described as a storm of some sorts. This the new condenser that Cole was talking about? Maybe. Then Nathan spawns out of nowhere into the scene and confirms our suspicions. The two seem pleased to see each other. After all, it has been years since they last spoke. They head back into the office and have a chat. Nathan asks how Jodie is. Well, considering one of his goons knocked her out in the previous scene, I would imagine she's got a bit of a headache, Nathan. What a dumb question. Oh, and the fact she's been on the streets for a few years at this point. So, get this right. Some players might overlook this. I did on my first playthrough. Jodie says literally what I just said about the knock to the head, and Nathan responds with,
That hit on the head did not help.
No, I'm sorry. I told them not to hurt you. I just didn't want to give you a chance to use Aiden.
So was it Nathan that called for Jodie to be taken in, or maybe the right word is captured by the agency, or was it a case if he heard that Jodie was being brought in and insisted that she were not to be harmed? I'm thinking the prior. I got Jodie to confront Nathan straight away as to why he never told her about her biological mum. Nathan says she was a danger to herself and her unborn child. Apparently he was just a researcher back then and only found out her fate as he rose through the ranks. But even so, this was not a very convincing answer. He still kept that from her for over 20 years. In amongst this, we also find out that Cole is okay and has faced no repercussions in assisting Jodie, just in case those were wondering, as I was at the time. Jodie pushes Nathan for more information on her mother. She's seen right through his weak answer. Apparently he tried to tell her. Well, not bloody hard enough, Nathan. Where in any of those early chapters with Jodie as a child does Nathan try to tell her? Not in a single one. He might well have done in moments we didn't see, but clearly he didn't try hard enough. Yes, admittedly, he did treat her like one of his own, and there was a reason for that. One of them being because she had no family in the end, and the other reason I'll get into later. And as for protecting her, I'm not so sure. I know I keep referring back to it, but he sent her into a fully wide open condenser on her own. Jodie, rightfully so, starts ranting to Nathan that this was his plan to send her back to the agency. This is where we foreshadow the next chapter. Apparently the agency have something for her to do, and they'll be grateful if she does it. Well, who's lining your pockets then, Nathan? He's basically portrayed his surrogate daughter and sold out to the agency. The game is almost passing off Nathan as an antagonist, and I started to see him as that. but I also thought he's just a coward and sold out. Hope that suit shrinks in the wash, Nathan. I was very disappointed in Nathan here, and I think that was David Cage's intentions. This was a very well written scene, and Willem Dafoe plays the scene well, and he does a great job of making the player angry with the character, because it is so obvious he is sold out by his persona on screen. So the task that Jodie is being asked to do is to investigate a country that has also managed to build a condenser of their own. At this time it was only the United States that had one. Nathan more or less states this is a preventative measure, but to me it seems more like a fear of who has the most power, and the agency is worrying. Jodie flat out refuses, rightfully so. However, according to Nathan, there is a big deal the agency is offering. If she tracks down this condenser and destroys it, she will be let go from the agency. Not that I believe Mr. Sellout, but where is the head of the agency pitching this deal to her personally? Might seem more believable to Jodie then. And if they're so grateful, where is this person, again, pitching this themselves, rather than going through a middleman? Maybe they thought Jodie would listen to Nathan? Who knows? Dragon's Hideout starts with one of the final scenes from Jodie's childhood, and if I'm honest, it is the most poignant. It starts with Jodie watching some cartoons, whilst waiting for Nathan and Cole to finish their work. She gets up and asks if she can go to sleep now. Nathan apologises, and says he's bought her a new book to read to her. He asks her to retrieve it from the back room. When she enters, Aiden starts messing with the lights, scaring Jodie. He really wasn't nice to her in the early days. When leaving the room, she sees a woman and a girl covered in blood. Were these projections shown by Aiden? Is she seeing this because of her connection to the Infraworld? Nathan notices that she looks spooked. When asked if she's alright, she says nothing. Cole reckons she is just tired and says Nathan should get her off to bed. As Nathan stands, the phone rings. Cole answers it and passes it to Nathan.
Yes, hold on. Nathan, it's for you.
Nathan Dawkins.
Nathan, what's up?
My wife. Norah, they were coming back from my mother's. Truck. Drunk driver. Wrong side of the road. They're dead.
Jodie, let's get you off to bed. Nathan, stay right here. I'll be right back. Come on, Jodie.
This scene was very well performed by all involved. Some might say William's performance here was lackluster, but how would you be able to comprehend news like that? This scene, like I aforementioned, is very poignant. Jodie was seeing Nathan's deceased wife and daughter because they were in the Infraworld, and they were trying to contact or see Nathan, or simply be by his side, similar to Stan's wife back in Homeless. She was by his side the whole time. This would also explain why Nathan's interest in the Infraworld grew progressively more obsessive as the years went by. Minor spoilers there, but if you've already played the game, you'll know what I'm on about. It would also explain as to why Nathan took Jodie on as his own, but again without sounding like a broken record, if he ended up loving Jodie like his own, why did he send her into that condenser? And why didn't he try harder in stopping the agency, commandeering Jodie? With her joining that agency has caused so much unrest in her adult life, probably more problems than Aiden has ever caused. After this scene, we're back to present day. Jodie has agreed to the mission off camera and is now being briefed by the military's top brass. Now I'll be honest, when I first started playing this chapter, I thought it was going to be another Navajo. Nothing would be related to the main narrative in any shape or form, but it is very important to help shape the endgame. The briefing is very simple. Travel to the Republic in Central Asia, find the condenser, destroy it along with any other equipment, in order to keep America and the world safe. More like to give America back its power. I again couldn't understand as to why Jodie had to be sent on this mission. Couldn't the military find this base and simply attack it? After the briefing, we're told Jodie is not going alone. She will have a team. The two chaps who trained her in the agency, and her best mate Ryan, in which doesn't go down too well. We also get the usual "I don't want to lose you" from Nathan. Why are you letting her go then? Seriously, Nathan is just a wet lettuce at this point. Luckily, Jodie isn't, and gives Ryan a piece of her mind. Rightfully so. Most players have forgotten what happened between the two way back in the mission chapter.
For the mission's sake? Try to keep Aiden from killing you? But no promises.
Well, we're off to a great start.
So it's obvious Jodie isn't going to be best pleased that they're having to work together. The next scene cuts to the pair being held hostage. I thought that went bloody well. But then we cut back to the group's arrival in the Republic. They're making their way through a serious snowstorm. They're right near their coordinates. Aiden finds them a house to take shelter in for a moment. Once inside, the group, well, apart from Jodie, moan about the cold, and that they believe they are nowhere near where they should be. I'm sorry, but did they expect this top secret base, containing one of the only two condensers in the world, to be a giant illuminated skyscraper welcoming them with roses around the door? I don't think so. It has to be in a place in the middle of nowhere, like they are now. It must be close. Jodie has a quick chat with Ryan. He asks if she is still mad with him. Considering what she said back in the briefing room, I would take that as a small hint, Ryan. He gives a feeble apology in which doesn't change her mind. She then heads outside to relieve herself. Once doing her business, a military patrol passes, confirming they are indeed in the right place, as I said they would be. She rushes back and tells the others what she saw. They leave the building and follow the trail. Everyone brings their equipment apart from Jodie. I found that a bit odd, but just an observation. Not that these characters need supplies in -40°C weather anyway. They come to a makeshift hangar. Aiden searches inside and it's a bunch of submarines, indicating to the group that this has to be located under the sea. Just look out for a pineapple. Aiden takes over one of the soldiers and uses him to take out the rest, allowing our group to enter. Once inside, Nick shoots the soldier Aiden was occupying, causing Jodie to feel some of the death herself, and which, come to think of it, reminded me of what happened to V in the early acts of Cyberpunk 2077. I did find it strange that she didn't have anything like this happen back in the mission chapter, when Aiden was strangling soldiers, or occupying them, then shooting them. Maybe because she was in control, she knew when it was coming, and could accommodate for it, but when it's a shock and unexpected, it hurts. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. Jodie comes up with a plan to dress as a soldier and take the submarine down to the base on her own. Apparently she used a submarine like this back on a simulator, back when she was training with the agency. How convenient. How come the others didn't recognise them too? They would have gone through the same training too, right? Anyway, Ryan decides to go with her, and the other two stay behind and search for a way out. Ryan takes the explosives and heads on board. Jodie takes control and we submerge our way down to the base. Fairly straightforward. The pacing is very good this far in too, nothing really to critique yet. Of course the pair do realise this may be just a one-way trip, and I also thought the same, but considering we just saw that interrogation scene beforehand, we clearly know that they made it into the base. But will they make it out? Let's crack on and find out. Whilst travelling, the musical score does a great job of setting the tension. The characters as well as the players have no idea what they're walking into, and we know that we can't go back. We can't prolong the inevitable. When arriving at the base, we're put back to the flash forward scene. It is Jodie and Ryan still being interrogated by some sort of officer. The officer grows tired of Jodie's resistance to his methods, so he decides to pressure her by threatening Ryan with a blade. We're given a chance to talk when we want to. Now I get this is a tense moment, but are we really meant to actually care for Ryan at this point? I mean, yes, some of the players might do, but Jodie does not. He's done nothing good for her at all throughout his character arc thus far, apart from joining her on the trip of no return. I mean, of course I wouldn't want him to die, but on my first playthrough, when he asked me not to talk, I didn't, because I thought it'd have dire consequences for Jodie. However, once his eye was gouged out, I thought, yeah, I think I better say something now. Seems these lot mean business. I would like to see what happens if you don't say anything. Does Ryan get blinded completely? Does he get killed? Or does Jodie automatically speak after so long? Again, please let me know in the comments. I should have tried it, but come on, we're already probably 3 hours in at this point. Let me off. In my second playthrough, I spared Ryan's eyes. I didn't want to see that again. No pun intended there, I swear. So Jodie ends up confessing. It is also apparent in this scene that Jodie and Aiden have been separated somehow, but we'll find out how in a moment. What I will say is that this scene isn't placed very well. I think it should have played like this. They actually got taken into the room after exiting the submarine. I think it should have been done in one long take. I mean, it works, but it just hasn't been planned very well. It's not very consistent, because when the scene closes, it cuts to the pair arriving. Maybe it's just there for foreshadowing, but again I think it should have been tagged on to the end of this scene we're seeing now, not to be shown before. They exit the submarine and Aiden takes control of the officer, so that way it looks like he is escorting Jodie and Ryan. It is here where they pass the containment field, and Jodie and Aiden are separated again, which foreshadowed the interrogation scene. Aiden must now find a way to get to Jodie and save her. He manages to get another soldier to destroy the containment barrier, allowing him to link back to Jodie. I found it strange how the link was severed, and Aiden wasn't sent back to the infraworld too. I thought he had to be attached to Jodie in order to sustain a balance between life and the infraworld. I'm not going to try and even work it out, but it's just something I noticed. Maybe because Jodie is still in the vicinity, he can hang on for a while. With Aiden shutting down the shield, it releases all sorts of entities, and the whole base is guns a-blazing.
Dad, the widow is alive! Guns a-blazing!
Although I think this actually shows that the rift is wide open. The entities are pouring out the condenser. He finds Jodie and heals her, thus re-establishing the link. We help her leave the room she's trapped in, and go after saving Private Ryan. Sorry, wrong piece of media again. After blasting more doors, we find Ryan, still in one piece. Now all we need to do is just find the explosives. As Jodie states, the rift is open, as I guessed just now. She tells Ryan to get back to the submarine and wait 15 minutes. It is now time to find the explosives. We find them after dealing with another soldier that was participating in the interrogation. It was quite easy really. I was expecting to have to search high and low. Not that I'm complaining, it helps with the pacing massively. Jodie makes her way through the corridors dodging entities and soldiers until she comes across a room with an opening to a pool of water that will assumingly lead to the condenser. We find a very futuristic diving suit. in which she commandeers and heads down to the condenser. Once there, she can plant the explosives. This is where I come back to what I was mentioning earlier about in the mission briefing. I couldn't understand as to why it was so imperative that Jodie takes on this mission, because everything thus far could have been done without Jodie. The base was found because she was outside and saw a passing convoy. The interrogation was stopped because she gave up their identities. Diving into the water and planting the explosives also required no input from Aiden. So what I'm saying is that any old agent could have tackled this mission and accomplished it, because everything here was accomplished without Aiden. So in a way, this whole chapter could have been cut, like Navajo. Well, no. I still stand by my words that this chapter does indeed help shape the endgame. I'm just pointing out in my analysis that this whole thing didn't have to be taken on by Jodie. So she makes it to the condenser, places the 3 charges, and a huge entity begins to pursue her, in which leads to her retreating back to the base. She makes it back, but is ambushed by the officer whom originally interrogated her. He waited ever so patiently, bless him. After a boss fight, consisting of following arrows again, Jodie makes her way out of the base, that is now letting in vast sums of water. She makes her way back to the docking area for the submarines, and Ryan is nowhere to be seen. I thought, great, I've picked another wrong choice, and Ryan has ditched us. Cheerio, Jodie. But nope. To be fair, he arrives in his most redeeming act yet. He stuck to his word and waited. He could have saved himself, but he didn't, in which I find commendable. When leaving the base, it blows up, in which damages their submarine. The pair must bail and continue the rest of the ascent in the freezing Arctic water. It's better to risk hypothermia than drown, I suppose. Thankfully, they make it to the surface. Once on dry land, Ryan asks if Jodie is still angry with him, in which I think she was, so that's what I went with. He then goes on to apologise for what he's done. He also thinks it's the right moment for him to confess his love for Jodie. Both actors did a great job of acting cold in this scene, considering this was probably captured in a climate-controlled motion capture studio. It takes a lot to act cold, and I don't mean just by standing there and going brrr. The way these performances were delivered were very well done. They played the part of hypothermia setting in very well. So while they're sitting there, probably waiting for the inevitable, Ryan goes on to ask if Jodie loves him too. I started to feel some sympathy for Ryan here, but again, why should I? Yes, he saved Jodie, but equally he got her into this mess by dragging her to their agency in the first place. It caused her to be dragged away from what she had close to family. She ended up on the streets because of him. She also never got to find out any answers about Aiden, or if she could finally be separated. All because Ryan took her away from the DPA. Yes, he may well have just been following orders, but he showed little to no sympathy or empathy throughout. So for that reason, I decided that Jodie did not feel the same way. And to me, this felt canon. Why would she suddenly forgive him just because he waited around at the base? Yes, I appreciate it and it was a redeemable effort, but it is not enough. It's similar to The Last of Us Part 2 with the character of Abby. Warning, spoilers ahead. Abby murdered a character that players had been idolising for nearly 10 years, Joel, right in front of Ellie. Most, but not all of the players in the community couldn't stand the character and wanted nothing to do with her. Throughout her playable chapters, she saves some children defecting from a cult-like militia, and this was a redeeming quality, but it just wasn't enough. Nothing could make up for killing Joel, a fan favourite, and I feel the same way in this game towards Ryan. Yes, okay, he hasn't killed anyone, but he has done nothing good for Jodie at all. Like I say, most of her toughest moments in life has been because of what he put her through back in Somalia, and dragging her to the agency. Yes, Nathan played his part in that too, but I think you get what I'm saying. Just because he saved her does not mean he is fully redeemed. Nothing can undo what she had to go through. I found it interesting though that only 31% of players on Steam told Ryan they didn't love him. Did you go with the opposite path? Let me know. So the camera pans away. I know I've mentioned many instances where I thought the game was going to end, but I really thought this was it. I was expecting the screen to fade, and that would be it. We would have to interpret our own ending as to whether they survived or not. But no, 2 members of their crew, I don't know their names, come along in a vehicle and save them in the nick of time, and there concludes the Dragon's Hideout. There was a lot to unpack there, but it is another really well presented and paced chapter. We will now head on to the final chapter at last, and then I will give my closing thoughts. Let's do it. Black Sun opens with again, like the Dragon's Hideout, with a scene with Jodie as a child again. The scene follows up from the last one, after the demise of Nathan's family. Cole is saying goodnight to Jodie, and she asks when she will see Nathan again. Apparently he hasn't left his office in 3 days. As Jodie tries to sleep, she sees Nathan's daughter, or is it just a vision? But I think it is Nathan's actual daughter in the infraworld leading Jodie to Nathan, because they want to speak to him. Because remember, Jodie can communicate with the other side. Jodie follows her till she ends up entering Nathan's office. Nathan is still devastated, obviously. Jodie approaches him and connects through to his family. They begin to speak to him. At first he is unsure, but once he is convinced, he of course doesn't want them to leave, but it is only for a limited time. This now confirms to us that this is why Nathan took an interest to the infraworld and developing condensers. He probably wants to speak to his family again. But I'm thinking it probably wasn't a good thing for Jodie to do that, because it made his situation more worse than it already is. The next scene opens to present day, with a debriefing by the top brass, boasting about the condenser being destroyed in the previous chapter, now allowing the United States to be the only country with a condenser. I said it was about power over safety, didn't I? Jodie's bored of the
irrelevant twaddle.
and leaves the room. Ryan is outside in the lobby waiting. I was hoping we could just walk straight past him, but nope, we have to talk to him. The pair go on to say about the mission, that they were right all along with myself, and probably most other players. It wasn't about human safety, but power. With Jodie now technically being freed from the agency, but let's see if they keep their word, Ryan asks what she will do now. We're given a range of dialogue options. I felt trying to live a normal life was the most fitting. She asks Ryan the same question. He has been offered a promotion, but he is still thinking about it. He then changes the subject and basically begs Jodie again to love him, that they could start over. A little desperate considering we've already rejected him maybe twice now, but it is a chance for the players who felt that maybe he could be redeemed. I reminded him that he did indeed lie to her, so it was a no from me. He says he understands and that it's the end of it, hopefully. Cole arrives in the scene at the right time. He comes down to let Jodie know that Nathan has been looking for her. Before entering his office, Cole warns her to be careful when he speaks to her, in which I found odd, but let's see what happens. While Jodie sees Nathan, Cole and Ryan go off for a drink in his office. Upon entering, Nathan is very pleased to see her safe. I'm glad Jodie kept stern and made it clear that she now wants the agency to keep her end of the bargain. Nathan hands Jodie a new identity, as well as $500,000 in compensation. We're given the option to accept or decline this offer. It would be nice to accept the money and start a new life with it. However, remember I chose the dialogue back with Ryan as a normal life. So with that, I chose to refuse the offer. Because if you truly want to start a new life, she is better off starting again from scratch. If she were to accept the new identity and the money, she will always have that attachment to the agency, and who knows, in the future, this could be used against her as a form of blackmail. I was surprised to see at the end of the chapter that only 29% of players on Steam refused the money. I honestly thought it would be higher. After what the agency put Jodie through, I wanted nothing more to do with them. But money talks, I guess. Jodie refuses and starts to walk away, but Nathan has one more thing he would like to ask. Before going on to ask whatever he is going to ask, he goes on to say about the passing of his wife and daughter 15 years back. This is where we tie in with what I mentioned earlier about Jodie connecting through to them back as a child, that it might have a negative effect on Nathan's grieving process. He tells Jodie for all that time he thought they were gone, but it was not until Jodie contacted them that Nathan realised that they were there all along. This then sprung a 15-year project of him trying to see his family again. He shows Jodie what he has created. It's some sort of hologram of his family from in the infraworld, but you don't have to be a DPA scientist to work out that they are clearly distressed. Whatever he has created isn't working in their favour. Turns out it is a modified condenser that he is working on. It will allow people to communicate with souls in the infraworld. Now I get why he wants to do this. He wants to see his family again. But ever since I saw Nathan in that big fancy office, the fact he held the information from Jodie about her mother and the whole agency business, I started to think that Nathan was becoming the antagonist in this narrative. But a part of me saw him losing it. Deep down he was just a broken man. He wants Jodie to help him talk to them again, as it's been so long. I decided to refuse, and Jodie does have a point. They are deceased. Sometimes it is better to leave them at peace, rather than keep them around as an experiment. Turns out though, the choices we pick are irrelevant. This is a linear path. Nathan begs us, and we connect through to them anyway, in which we find out they are indeed suffering. Nathan loses it and becomes hysterical, accusing Jodie of lying that she was the one saying that. Jodie tries to be sympathetic, but ends up saying goodbye and leaving, knowing fully well he is not the man he once was. He is truly broken. Jodie now heads off and leaves the agency, as well as the DPA for the last time, to finally live a normal life. Or maybe not. Jodie regains consciousness, and the agency's top brass says hello to her and explains that they cannot let her go, nor put her down, due to what she'd be able to do as an entity, so they decide to put her into a permanent coma, like they did with her mother. What an a-hole. He at least could have given a reason as to why they couldn't let her leave. She just wanted to leave and start afresh. I guess it's because she knows top secret information. Just shows what people will do for power. But the bigger question to all this is that did Nathan know this was going to happen? If I'm honest, I don't think he did. He might have called the guards out of spite after Jodie tried to help him, but they would have arrived that quick after the scene. Talking of Nathan, the next time Jodie awakes again, he comes into her room and claims that she has opened his eyes. She asks for help, but Nathan completely discards her plea for help. He says he is going to deactivate the containment field of the Black Sun condenser, allowing entities to flow right through our dimension. He has completely lost it. Nathan was not becoming more and more evil, but rather more and more broken. She tries to warn him that that is a bad idea, but he has none of it and leaves the room, leaving Jodie there. Again, he has completely lost it. He probably didn't even know that she was hooked up to this machine, although how did he know she was there in the first place? I can't really explain that, to be honest. This narrative can be very convoluted at times. Aiden tries to free Jodie, but the acid is making him weak, so he decides to go off to try and get someone's attention. He finds Cole and Ryan in the office, literally upstairs, and gets their attention. They follow Aiden's lead. I enjoy playing this scene as Aiden, as he was doing something good for Jodie. Again, because like I aforementioned, he hasn't always been so helpful towards her. Once Cole and Ryan find her, they get her out of the machine in the nick of time, and she goes on to explain what Nathan is planning, and they have to stop him. But it's too late. He's opened the field. Entities are everywhere. Our trio rush into a control room in order to reactivate the field. Whilst on our way there, we stumble across the same top brass who put Jodie into that coma-inducing machine. Suddenly he's changed his tune and wants Jodie to help. Funny that, because earlier he couldn't decide her fate. Jodie throws him a great insult and pushes him out of the way. He then immediately asks Ryan to evacuate him, in which Ryan hands in his notice, with a punch to the jaw. That's one way to do it. Just in case you couldn't work out, this is finally, I repeat, finally, the end game. The final chapter, and the pacing is mixed, but it does a great job of tying up all the loose ends. The hard part is getting to the condenser, like waiting for Cole to realise there is nothing he can do at this terminal. This went on for a little too long. A bit like this video.
Exit the building immediately.
It's not working. I can't stop the condenser or reactivate the field. There's nothing we can do. Let's get out of here while we still can.
Cole realises the only thing he can do is go into the Black Sun, the condenser, and work on the manual controls there to shut it down. Jodie decides to go with him, and then after some hesitancy, Ryan follows too, with all three of them realising this really will be a one-way trip, even with the shields. Apparently the shutdown method is more of a self-destruct, and it will be instantaneous. And so they embark on their way to the condenser. On the way, they try their best to avoid the entities, but one knocks down Cole, and we're given a choice to save or leave him. I couldn't leave him, so Jodie decides to go back and pick him up, and Ryan also steps in and helps him to safety. Once behind the shutter door, Iden manages to heal Cole enough to where he will survive, and we have to leave him behind. Jodie and Ryan now push on as a pair and enter the Black Sun. Cue Soundgarden. I know licensing music must be expensive, but this whole scene would have been much more impactful with Black Hole Sun playing in the background. Rest in peace, Chris Cornell. As the pair navigate this internal storm, they pass lost souls, backing up Jodie's and Nathan's points in the past as to why it would be a bad idea if a passage was opened, because these souls have no idea where they are, and obviously amongst the souls are entities whom pose a much higher risk. Jodie gets stopped by one of the souls asking her a question. Because of this, she loses Ryan amongst the storm. However, instead she finds Nathan, who is trying to find his family. Jodie tries reasoning with him, as he is clearly in the way of the controls to shut down the condenser. Nathan, like I mentioned, is completely broken, so much so he points his firearm at Jodie. She tries to reason again, and this time it works. He allows her to pass. But Nathan is tired. He decides to take his life. He knows it is the only way he would truly be able to see his family again, and we see exactly that happens. They are immediately reunited. I saw this coming a mile off, but I also noticed right away that he was whole again. He asked Jodie to put an end to all of this, for him, almost apologising in a way. This is why I never really classed him as an antagonist. Overall, yes, he came across as one when we reunited with him in the DPA, but in the end, he just missed his family, and it drove him into a downward spiral of despair and desperality. But finally, he is at peace. This now allows Jodie and Ryan to proceed onwards. Before we get to the controls though, there is one final boss fight with an entity. Ryan tempts fate and says they'll be buggered without the belts, right as Jodie's packs up. Ryan does the heroic thing and gives Jodie his containment shield, but Jodie should be safe anyway, as Iden can defense against entities. I was thinking this all through this scene. Maybe there is just too many for Iden to handle? Either way, it was a thoughtful gesture, Ryan. Well done. He demands that she pushes forward. They share a kiss, and she does exactly that. Maybe Jodie has forgiven Ryan now? Or was it a heat of the moment thing? Either way, she pushes forward, and this is where things get confusing, so bear with me. As she is advancing, entities are trying to stop her. They more look like BTs from Death Stranding. Maybe Hideo Kojima got some pointers from this game? Anyway, while moving, we are seeing snippets of her memories, and with each one she is getting younger. If I'm honest, I have no way of explaining it. Maybe it's something to do with Aiden. Maybe the entities were trying to turn her into an entity to stop her flipping the switch. Who knows? We then jump to flashbacks, again to Jodie's birth, and here, all the loose ends are finally tied up. Jodie was a twin, and Aiden was the other, the stillborn. His soul has been connected to Jodie's since birth. They are beyond two souls. It now makes sense to the player. It still doesn't explain as to why in some chapters he is a bit of a hindrance to Jodie. Maybe it was just brothers being brothers, but who knows, maybe it was frustration that he was tied to her. Jodie is then put into a field. Everything is calm, quiet. This must be Aiden's world, a place between the real world and the infraworld. This is the game's version of the beaches, again used in Death Stranding. After all this time, she finally sees her brother. She reaches out to him, but she is sent to a crossroads. Again, she is on her own beach, so to speak. It is now for her to decide her own future for once. She can either cross into the infraworld and be properly reunited with Aiden and other acquaintances she's met on this journey, or she can choose life and start anew and grow old. But with the condenser shut down, it will sever her tie with Aiden. Jodie must decide. Now I looked at both choices and sat on the pause screen for multiple minutes and weighed up the options. Going to the Beyond would have made sense when you look back at the homeless chapter, but since then, Jodie has managed to pull herself out of that dark place, and she wanted to start a new life away from the agency and all who she knew. So I thought life was the most obvious choice, and looking at the data, 82% of other players on Steam thought so too. Because she can live out her life to an old age and then visit Aiden and her family when she passes, they'll always be there waiting for her, so she might as well enjoy life for a while, as the poor girl has had a tough time thus far. It would be nice to see her have some happiness. I'll be honest, I've never experienced the Beyond ending, but maybe I will one day. I would have loved to experience all the paths and endings, but that would be a 10+ hour video, and I think this video is going to be long enough on its own. As Jodie steps back into life, the condenser explodes. The pair survive, but as expected, Aiden has been severed, dragged back into the infraworld. It is obviously hard for Jodie to comprehend. Ryan does a good job of comforting her, but that's going to be hard to adjust to something that has been around for all those years and it suddenly vanishes. And there closes the final chapter of the game. But we're not done yet. On to the epilogues. Yes, there is quite a few, and I will run through them and which one is the most fitting or canon, although all of them could be considered canon. Now all epilogues in the life choice start off the same, so I will only be running through it the once. We join Jodie 3 months later. She is residing in a very picturesque spot, a cabin by a river. She tells us that ever since the condenser explosion, she has been slowly losing her memory. Again, I'm not sure how I can explain this. Maybe a bad case of concussion? Or the fact that Aiden helped her retain her memories? Or it was simply like she said, she was in the infraworld too long. She writes down her memories while she can, but after 3 months I'd say she can still remember a lot, as we'll see. We also get confirmation that Cole survived too, which was nice to see. I really liked his character, but but we knew he would survive as Aiden helped him, but it was good to properly sign off his character. We learned that the agency is leaving her alone too, at least for the time being. She realises, as nice as it is to be in this cabin, she must start to piece back her life together without Aiden, because staying there, mulling it over, just isn't doing her any good. It is here we choose our end path. This whole, what I'm going to call the cabin scene, plays out the same. It is here the epilogue changes based on what you choose. On my first playthrough, I was so sick of seeing Jodie unhappy, I went with Ryan's ending. Even though, like I said, all what he had done wasn't redeemable, he did do a good job in the final chapter, and they had an on-off relationship throughout, and it was the closest person Jodie now knows. The two reunite and set off travelling together via boat. They end up on a beach, and it all seems good. They are both happy. Even though Ryan didn't exactly make the right choices, he does care for Jodie. In a way, this teaches the player that sometimes you have to forgive the unforgivable. At least to a certain extent, there are some boundaries. The two settle on a beach, overlooking a sunset. Jodie sits by the waves, as Ryan keeps an eye on the fire. Out of nowhere, a coconut rolls towards Jodie. Then in the sand appears, "Still here." Yes, that's correct. Aiden, although disconnected from Jodie, he is still watching over her. I got to say it felt a very much fitting ending to this dark and emotional narrative. I was fairly content. Here is something I don't understand though. At the end of each epilogue, before the end credits roll, there is a vision Jodie has. In the future, she is wearing one of the shields we saw in the Black Sun, and she is overlooking a city on fire. This is maybe some sort of premonition, maybe a hint at some DLC that actually never came, but to me, I'm not taking anything from this scene as canon, because if you remember at the start of the epilogue, Jodie was losing her memory, if I remember rightly, so how can she be thinking about, well, thinking into the future? I'm taking the scene as a hint to future or cancelled DLC, and nothing more. Then the end credits roll. So on my second playthrough, despite David Cage's advice, I explored the different epilogue paths. I tried the alone path, and it was definitely the most depressing. It consists of Jodie heading back out onto the road, while still being followed by souls and entities. I'm not sure how or why this is happening, as Jodie is now separated from Aiden. She ends up in a hotel room, and Aiden makes contact through the television rather than the sand in the last scene. Then the premonition scene plays out the same, and the credits roll. The ending with Jay, well, considering what I said much earlier in the video about the Navajo chapter, you probably know how I feel about this one. It starts with Jodie making peace with Ryan, then making her way back to the ranch on the same motorcycle Jay gave her. As she arrives, Jay literally sprints to her and bear hugs her. It's all just too awkward and forced, and again, like I said, I saw nothing developing between these characters. But if players did feel there was something there, then I guess this is a path you can take. The scene ends with Jodie waking up, and Aiden showing his presence, like the others so far, and the premonition scene plays again, and the credits roll. The final option we can choose is to reunite with the homeless crew, or at the very least Tuesday, who is shown in the photo. The scene starts again with Jodie saying her piece to Ryan. The next scene starts with Jodie ringing the doorbell. When I saw who answered, I had the biggest smile on my face. It was Stan who answers the door. Turns out all of them are living together. Stan now has a job, Jimmy has got clean and is now attending further education, Jodie works part-time at a bar, and Walter looks after baby Zoe. It feels so wholesome, this scene. It comes full circle. The homeless crew inspired Jodie to turn her life around, but it would also appear that she inspired them too. It's all so heartwarming. Well, at least to me anyway. The scene ends with Jodie properly meeting Zoe. What I found strange is that Jodie for some reason felt there was a connection between the two of them, maybe because she helped deliver her. I just didn't understand it really. There is also no Aiden making his presence in this scene either, which I found odd. Maybe this ending is the true start of Jodie's new life, to forget about Aiden completely. Also, the premonition scene is different in this ending too. Zoe is standing behind her. Again, I still don't see the connection between Jodie and Zoe, unless I missed something way back in the homeless chapter. Maybe instead of helping Stan talk to his wife, maybe I should have spoken to Tuesday. Maybe this would have uncovered more. After this, the credits roll. To me, the most fitting ending, or the canon ending, has to be either Ryan's or regrouping with the homeless crew. I know this game is what you make it. You tailor Jodie's story to how you see fit, but with what was laid out in front of me, these two endings felt the most rewarding, and that, my dear viewers, is Beyond Two Souls. And what a game it is, and what a video this has been. I will now close out with some final thoughts. Beyond Two Souls was definitely not what I was expecting, but to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect. It has been one of the most interesting narratives I've ever experienced. The visuals, setting, the writing and performances that were delivered were spot on. Elliot Page did a great job of portraying Jodie's life, considering this was his one and only video game role, and after how confusing the narrative probably was for him to work out, I can see why he hasn't returned for either a sequel, DLC or another game franchise at all. William Dafoe did a great supporting role and captured Nathan's slow downward spiral perfectly. David Cage's writing is very strong throughout. Like I mentioned right at the start, the game doesn't hold your hand through this narrative. However, there are some things that should have been explained in some way, like towards the end of Black Sun, and how Jodie has these visions of the future. These sort of gaps you don't see on a first playthrough. You also may overlook some of the choices supporting characters make. I think for that reason David Cage recommends just one single playthrough, because on a second you do notice the small flaws. I also really didn't get on well with the control scheme that was laid out. It was much more fiddly than Detroit Becomes Human, although the story makes up for it. At the end of the day, the controller is the main connection to any game. Although the narrative is very good, the story overall did feel linear. We did have multiple dialogue choices, but I felt none of them really changed anything drastic overall. Again, coming from a title like Detroit Become Human, that title certainly improved on this. After all, even though this is Jodie's story, we decide how we want to shape it, but most choices chosen didn't change a whole lot. The end game still ends up being the same. I felt the pacing could have been better. This was definitely improved upon with Detroit Become Human. I think easily a few hours could have been shaved off the total average playtime. My first playthrough was around 10 hours, in which is short for a AAA game, when you compare to a title such as Rockstar Games' 2018 title, Red Dead Redemption 2, in which the average playthrough time is around 60 hours, and that is just for the main story. What we need to remember is that in that 10 hours, there is a lot to take in, to analyse. You have to keep your eye on the choices you make. However, there were times where the pacing was awful, like the Navajo chapter, and in my opinion, that could have been scrapped altogether. It had nothing to do with the main narrative at all. I felt like I was wasting my time with that chapter. Even though with the second playthrough I managed 9 hours playtime, I still think it is too long for a game like this. Like I said, with so much to keep an eye on in this narrative, some players might find it exhausting to keep slogging on with this story, whereas Detroit Become Human has a nice well-rounded 7 to 8 hours playtime. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot to unpack in that game too, hence my 3-hour critique on the game, but the pacing was good enough that it felt like a 3-hour game. I'm not saying that games have to be short to be fun, but when a title is asking so much of the player, making choices, remembering what happened X amount of chapters previously is a lot to ask of a casual player, especially over 9 to 10 hours. I loved this narrative, I truly did. I loved the experience, but even with my 23 years of experience playing video games, I myself did struggle with trying to work out as to what was actually going on in the game, especially towards the end. The narrative did get a bit convoluted at times. I've been lucky to have screen capturing software to where I can go back and analyse each chapter and its scenes, but the casual player isn't going to want to do that. Where certain plot points are dragged out, you end up forgetting what it was all about when it gets tied up. But thankfully there is so much more that this game gets right, and I am happy to overlook it, but it was something that was always in the back of my mind. At the end of the day, this game, and maybe even the genre as a whole, isn't going to be for everyone. I myself loved this game. Was it a masterpiece? No. Was it David Cage's best work? I can't say that it was. But what it was is a one-of-a-kind experience that everyone should at least experience the once. And for me, it has to be in my top 3 best games that I've played to date. The narrative path that I chose and experienced will stay with me as a gamer forever. Beyond Two Souls was close to a Concord moment that can never be repeated. Oh yeah, we're done. Oh yes.